the roaring chaos of 1920s America, Al Capone rose like a dark star, lighting up the underworld with his ruthless ambition and dangerous charm. But behind every bullet fired, every bribe handed, and every body buried, there stood a woman, Mae Capone. She was the silent, steadfast shadow at Scarface's side, enduring betrayal, heartbreak, and the crushing weight of being married to the most feared man in the country. For nearly 3 decades, Mae navigated a life teetering on the edge of law and infamy, all while raising their only son and protecting the crumbling remnants of their empire. This is not just the tale of Al Capone's rise and fall, it's a story of unwavering love and resilience, of a woman who fought to keep her family together, even as the world fell apart around her. So step into the smoky speakeasies and glitzy hideaways of America's gangster era and see it all through the eyes of the one person who never betrayed him, Mrs. Al Capone. Born on April 11, 1897, in the working-class crucible of Brooklyn, New York, Mary Josephine Coughlin, later known simply as Mae, was one of 7 children raised in a modest 2-story home at 117 3rd Place. The street sat just close enough to the docks for the air to carry the scent of fish, salt water, and violence. The family lived a life anchored in decency. Her father, a mason, was known for his piety and honesty. Her mother, for her unwavering devotion to the children she shepherded through a neighborhood where fistfights were routine and futures uncertain. Mae grew into a striking teenager, tall, slim, with high cheekbones and intelligent brown eyes that sparkled with promise. Locals imagined her one day gracing stages or magazine covers. But life, as it often does, had other plans. A pronounced overbite and receding chin, perhaps a minor imperfection in another context, crippled her confidence. The mirror did not flatter, and the camera was no friend. Mae shrank from public gaze, and dreams of acting or modeling dissolved quietly into the backdrop of her shy demeanor. And then came Al. They met in 1918 in an illicit club on Carroll Street, a speakeasy thinly disguised as a legitimate business. The war had just ended, and returning soldiers were desperate to drown their memories in gin and jazz. Behind curtained storefronts, the night pulsed with forbidden pleasure. Cards shuffled, bootlegged liquor flowed, and every corner offered someone to dance with or something to forget. Alphonse Capone, not yet infamous, was among the shadows. He too bore a scar that shaped him, not just emotionally, but quite literally. A year earlier, while working as a waiter at the Harvard Inn on Coney Island, Capone's mouth, never known for tact, landed him in a maelstrom. He aimed a crude compliment at a passing Italian beauty. "Honey, you have a nice behind. Let me pay you that compliment," he slurred. She happened to be the sister of an underworld enforcer, and this gallantry was rewarded not with a phone number but a blade. The gangster slashed Capone across the face, carving deep furrows into his left cheek and neck, gruesome souvenirs from an ego outpaced by impulse. From then on, Al showed only his right side, the good side. He learned to weaponize charm as a distraction from disfigurement. Loud talk, a big grin, and ice blue eyes masked the scars that newspapers and history would never forget. That night, the world was introduced to Scarface, a moniker he loathed, born from a moment of drunken bravado that introduced him to both violence and notoriety in one swift stroke. And so, in the dim light of an illegal bar, 2 damaged souls, one hiding her smile, the other hiding his face, found each other, drawn together not by perfection, but by the art of concealment. Al Capone's story begins in quieter despair. His parents, Gabriele Capone and Teresina Raiola, hailed from Angri, a sun-baked town in Italy's impoverished Salerno province. Gabriele hustled through life's bottom rungs, grocery clerk, pasta maker, lithographer, never staying long in one trade, never rising above survival. Teresina, a devout Catholic and skilled seamstress, shared his poverty and his hopes. When she became pregnant with their second child, the couple made a choice common among the desperate. They turned their eyes westward. America, the promised land, or so the steamship brochures claimed. By 1894, they had arrived in Brooklyn, 2 children in tow and a third on the way. Gabriele managed to open a barbershop and eventually became a naturalized citizen, an achievement that offered their growing brood of 9 children a shot at something better than bare survival. But young Alphonse, born in 1899, wanted none of it. The idea of earning an honest living, of bending to teachers or clerics, seemed laughable to him. He left parochial school at 14, not with a diploma, but after punching a teacher. The family had moved to 21 Garfield Place, but the new address changed nothing. In 1920, Gabriele died, taking with him whatever fragile structure had kept Al tethered to the respectable world. Authority meant nothing to him now. The streets beckoned, and he followed. Without a father, without faith in the system, Al found a different kind of family, one bound not by love, but by silence and the thrill of the forbidden. The man who opened the door was Johnny Torrio, a local racketeer who ran the numbers game and a handful of gambling dens. Torrio needed a kid who could run errands, keep his mouth shut, and swing a bat if necessary. Alphonse fit the bill. He was soon caught up in the ethnic underworld turf wars, Italians versus the Irish White Hand gang. The violence was relentless, efficient, and usually unpunished. Between 1915 and 1925, 100 men vanished or bled out in alleys, their cases left to rot in police files. Mae Capone entered his life like a sudden shift in key. She was 2 years older, 21 when they met, and worked as a salesgirl. Her manner was calm, almost unnervingly so. She didn't flinch. She didn't talk much. And, crucially, she was Irish. At the turn of the century, such a pairing was almost scandalous. Italians and Irish were historic rivals in the American melting pot, neighbors in the slums, enemies in the alleys. Many Irish women were drawn to Italian men's early, almost desperate eagerness to marry. The Irish boys, by contrast, often sidestepped matrimony like a pothole. Italian men, on the other hand, saw Irish women as the ideal, obedient, devout, indifferent to the business of their husbands. Al's mentor, Torrio, had married an Irish woman, Anna, and he seemed content. For Capone, this felt like destiny dressed as romance. Mae, with her poise and cool demeanor, seemed to soothe the violent tempo of his life. She spoke softly. She didn't pry. She was, in his own words, a sweet little Irish girl who took me for better or for worse. At just 19, Alphonse Capone was still more boy than man, a volatile cocktail of charm and bravado, still living with his mother Teresina on Garfield Place, just a short walk from the more reserved, respectable world of Mae Capone. Mae's parents weren't thrilled. In the social ladder of early 20th century Brooklyn, Italians were not seen as an aspirational match for the Irish. Quite the opposite. Among Irish families, Italian husbands had a reputation that was half myth, half cautionary tale. They were said to be quick with their fists, liberal with the bottle, and serially unfaithful. Marrying an Irish woman may have been a social promotion for an Italian man. For an Irish girl, it was often seen as a descent. But scandal has a way of burning through prejudice. In April, Mae became pregnant. Still underage, Al had to ask his parents for permission to marry, but the clock didn't wait for consent. On December 4th, 1918, Mae gave birth to Albert Francis Capone, Sonny, whose godfather was none other than Johnny Torrio, the gangster who was quickly becoming more family than family. In a deeply Catholic community, a child born outside wedlock wasn't just gossip, it was a transgression. The pressure came fast and hard. Capone secured a dispensation from the church to bypass the traditional bans, and a wedding was hastily arranged for December 30th. Both lied on the paperwork. Mae shaved off a year, Al added one. 3 weeks after giving birth, Mae stood at the altar of St. Mary Star of the Sea, the Capone family's church. The ceremony was meant to seal a union, but it also spotlighted division. The families, speaking different languages and holding tight to old world mistrust, could barely mask their disdain. Irish guests watched Mae vanish into the Capone clan like a ship swallowed by foreign waters. She was no longer one of them. Yet Mae, ever stoic, accepted this shift with a quiet dignity. She had given birth to what she saw as a miracle child, and that was enough. Whatever storm followed, she would endure it for him. Sonny became her axis, her devotion total, almost blinding. Al, for his part, suddenly found himself with a mission that didn't involve street corners or brass knuckles. He wanted to give Mae everything she'd lost by marrying him, and give Sonny everything he never had. "What do I want my son Albert to become when he grows up?" he once mused. "A man, a brave man, who can look everyone in the eye. A man with nerves, even if he's on the wrong side of the gun." It was a father's wish wrapped in contradiction, a hope for integrity, shadowed by a life that offered none. Al wanted Sonny to attend university, to be a doctor, a lawyer, a man of stature, not a bootlegger, not a thug, certainly not his father. He wanted the boy to know the world's beauty, not just its back alleys. And most of all, he wanted him to have what he'd found in Mae, a woman who could turn any hand, no matter how cursed, into a winning one. But what a man wants and what life delivers are rarely the same thing, especially for a man like Al Capone. Despite his vows, his dreams, and his borrowed words of love, Al still can't give Mae the life he believes she deserves. Night after night, he slips out of the house, leaving Mae alone with their infant son. He doesn't go to work in any traditional sense. Instead, he dresses like royalty on loan, tailored suits that shimmer under low lights, slicked back, thinning brown hair, a chubby face always curved into a charming smile. He plays the host in backroom clubs, heavy with cigar smoke and perfume, greeting gamblers and gangsters alike, drawing them in with jokes, drinks, and empty promises. Then a window cracks open. Johnny Torrio, his mentor and now the godfather of his child, announces a move to Chicago. The East Coast, battered by law enforcement and intergang chaos, is no longer fertile ground. Chicago, Torrio claims, is untamed, unwatched, a city where empires could be born. Al doesn't hesitate. He follows. By the summer of 1923, Al and Mae are no longer just a young couple with a baby, they're homeowners. Their new house at 7244 South Prairie Avenue, a red brick two-story structure in a sunny, tidy neighborhood, feels like a fresh start. The street bustles with life, corner stores, vegetable stalls bursting with color, and a pace far gentler than Brooklyn's grit. For the first time, they own something. The house cost $15,000, with Al paying 3/4 in cash. The remaining $4,000? A loan co-signed by his mother, Teresa, who of course comes along for the move. Security comes first. Al installs thick iron bars on the windows and reinforces the front door with a wrought iron grille. Outside, it looks like a slice of the American dream. Inside, it resembles an Italian fortress, loud, crowded, and perpetually simmering. Mae tries to craft a home from the chaos, but privacy is a luxury rarely afforded to gangland royalty. The house overflows with Capones. Ralph Bottles, who handles the bottling operation, and Frank, whose specialty is silence, permanent silence. While Al prefers to bribe or bargain, Frank has a simpler solution. A dead man never talks. Then there's James, a walking contradiction who served in World War I and now works against bootleggers. And of course, Teresa, the indomitable matriarch who reigns from the first floor, speaking only Italian but understanding everything. Mae, quiet and reserved, is overwhelmed. In this thick stew of dialects, bravado, and blood ties, she barely registers. How does one assert herself among a dozen Capones? The kitchen, a sacred space in any Italian household, is not hers. Mae sits at the edge of the maelstrom, a ghost with a wedding ring, watching a family perform its unbreakable unity, its fortress of food, language, and noise, while she drifts just outside its walls. Her miracle child coos upstairs. Her husband dines with his brothers. And the house, the promised life, groans under the weight of dreams deferred. Mae Capone, increasingly adrift in her own home, chooses quiet exile over competition. While the kitchen buzzes with the Capone women's synchronized ballet of chopping, frying, and shouting, Mae prefers the solitude of her room. There she tends to Sonny, the child who has become her entire universe, or buries herself in books, educational science, equine anatomy, anything that offers escape. Downstairs, the men smoke, drink, and play sette mezzo, an Italian card game that sounds more romantic than it is, a game of half smiles and full wallets, while garlic meatballs and braciole simmer under Teresa's iron rule. She's the one who tells Al to sit down and clean his plate, recalled the crime boss's niece years later. Teresa wasn't just the cook, she was the general. Running a household where grown men carried guns meant wielding a ladle like a saber. Mae, still an outsider, fetched flour and sugar from neighbors when Teresa barked orders, rarely a please in sight. The family's women formed a matriarchal wall around Al, and Mae had not yet, and might never, breach it. These women didn't ask questions, didn't complain. When the women of the clan want to talk, someone once said, they're told to be quiet and mind their business. They barely saw their husbands, how impolite it would be to interrogate them during those brief appearances between killings. So Mae played her part, descending in time for the meal, clearing plates in silence, then withdrawing back to her room as card games and gossip bloomed over anisette and smirks. She left the laughter behind and returned to her books, the only space where she could still call something her own. But the world outside would not remain quiet. Politics, as always, muddied everything. In 1923, William Deaver was elected mayor of Chicago, riding a wave of moralistic reform and promising to enforce prohibition with iron resolve. The Capone-Torrio alliance responded the only way gangsters know how. They moved the battlefield. If Chicago didn't want them, they would build an empire in Cicero, a law-light suburb to the west, and bring Chicago's pleasures to them. Brothels, casinos, cabarets. The rot would find its audience. Power, of course, required protection. The plan was simple. Take over Cicero politically. Install a friendly face as mayor. Rule from the shadows. On April 1st, 1924, Frank Capone took charge of the election campaign, not with pamphlets and promises, but with shotguns and machine guns. Frank, always the soldier, orchestrated a full-blown intimidation campaign. Voters were reminded that their safety hinged on the correct choice. Polling stations were flanked by men with cold eyes and hot barrels. One opponent's campaign office was stormed, his assistant shot in the legs and taken hostage with 8 others until the polls closed. It was democracy, but with a warning label. Police, now forced to act, sent 70 plainclothes officers to the field. A midday shootout erupted in the streets of Cicero. Frank, mistaking the lawmen for a North Side ambush squad, reached for his weapon. The police responded with 12 bullets. Frank Capone, enforcer, brother, was left dead on the pavement. By sundown, Joseph Klenher, the Capone candidate, had won the election. Justice, meanwhile, was not on the ballot. A few public officials were kidnapped in retaliation just in case anyone missed the message. The Capones might lose a man, but they never lose a war. On April 4th, 1924, the modest red brick house on South Prairie Avenue became a theater of grief. Mae Capone, quiet and dutiful, was thrust into the role of hostess to a funeral fit for a statesman. Her brother-in-law, Frank, lay in a silver-plated coffin, and the mourning was not optional. Al, determined to immortalize his brother, spent $20,000 on flowers, buying them from none other than his rival Dean O'Banion. In a rare moment of gangster civility, O'Banion obliged, sending his most opulent arrangements. A funeral procession of 150 cars snaked its way to Mount Carmel Cemetery, a parade of death and defiance. For 2 hours, all of Cicero's dens of sin went dark by Al's decree. If he wept, so would the entire city. He demanded a collective grief, the kind that echoes not just through streets, but through history. Inside the house, grief took a quieter form. Teresa was inconsolable. The Capone brothers seethed, their mourning mixed with rage. Mae, caught in the center of this maelstrom, clung to Sonny like a life raft. She offered no grand displays, no threats of vengeance, only whispered prayers and the hope that the violence would, for once, exhaust itself. But the blood would not stop spilling. In November 1924, Dean O'Banion was assassinated in his flower shop, his own elegant bouquets drenched in irony and gunpowder. Just weeks later, in early 1925, Johnny Torrio, Al's mentor and guiding hand, was gunned down outside his home. Though he survived, the attack cracked the illusion of invincibility that surrounded him. Al, already haunted by the deaths of his father and brother, unraveled further. Losing Torrio would be unthinkable. While Johnny recovered, Al practically lived at his bedside. Mae was once again left alone in her own home, a familiar pattern, yet no less isolating. Within a week, Johnny was up thanks to careful nursing and the firm presence of his wife, Anna. But something essential had changed. He's no longer Torrio the Terrible. The crime boss's near-fatal wounds have exposed a deadly truth. He's mortal. And in the underworld, once blood has been spilled, it's only a matter of time before the vultures circle. On February 9th, 1925, fearing another attempt on Torrio's life, Al arranged for a quiet escape through the hospital's back exit. Johnny was hustled into a waiting sedan and smuggled to court, where he paid a $5,000 fine and stoically accepted a 9-month sentence at Lake County Jail in Waukegan. It was less punishment than sabbatical. The local sheriff, happy to oblige, let Anna transform the cell into something closer to a luxury suite. In came the brass bed, plush rugs, chairs, curtains, even a gramophone and radio. While his wounds healed, the couple played house behind bars. And Anna, with time and privacy on her side, began to press Johnny to retire. For good. When Torrio's sentence ended, he didn't return to power. He vanished. Escorted by armed guards in 2 cars, Johnny and Anna slipped away in an armored limousine to a remote train station just south of the Indiana border. Al's men, weapons drawn, secured the area until the train departed. From there, the couple embarked on a final journey, not of conquest, but of escape. New Orleans, Havana, the Bahamas, Palm Beach, and finally, Italy. Johnny Torrio retired at 43, a man who had built empires in shadows, but chose exile over martyrdom. He left behind a crown, and Al Capone was ready to wear it. With Dean O'Banion 6 feet under and Johnny Torrio riding gondolas in Italy, Alphonse Capone took the crown he'd been circling for years. He was now the undisputed ruler of Chicago's underworld, a city with as many corpses as cops, and one where bullets often wrote the bylaws. Power like that does strange things to a man. It sparks introspection laced with justification, the kind that sounds less like remorse and more like a philosophical alibi. What does a man think about when he kills another man in a gang war? Maybe about God's idea of self-defense. Maybe it's just killing the guy who'd kill you first, or defending your business, your family. There are worse guys out there than me. One wonders if Mrs. Capone, quietly folding laundry while her son battles an infection that could end his life, finds these musings anything but hollow. At home, the real war was against illness. Sonny, now 7, had always been fragile. He was his mother's joy, and terror rolled into one, the beloved child with a persistent ear infection that medicine could no longer soothe. Doctors, many of them, all said the same thing. Surgery was the only way. But it came with a brutal catch. If it worked, it might save him, but it would almost certainly cost him his hearing. Mae and Al clutched hope like a lifeline. They turned to New York, to the office of Dr. Lloyd at St. Nicholas Place. Al, with desperation disguised as generosity, threw out a figure. $100,000 if you save him. The actual cost, $1,000, but in fear, love loses count. On Christmas Eve, the boy was taken into surgery. Mae, the mother, prayed without pause. Her prayers found mercy. Sonny survived. He would hear the world, not all of it, but enough, thanks to a new and miraculous invention, the hearing aid. Exhausted, but relieved, the doctors advised Mae and Al to rest. And so, with her blessing, Al went out to unwind at the Adonis Social Club on 20th Street in Brooklyn, a speakeasy where Italians and Irish drank side by side, sometimes in peace, often on the edge of war. That edge snapped. The White Hand Gang, Irish rivals clinging to fading influence, stumbled into the club, drunk and looking for blood. They hurled slurs and baited the Italians with venom. Al's crew held their peace. But then came the women, Irish girls with Italian fiancés, and one gang member sneered, "Come back and taste white men, for God's sake." That was the spark. The lights died. Chaos bloomed. When the lights flickered back on, the floor was sticky with the blood of 3 Irishmen and several Italians. The police arrived to find a room full of amnesiacs. No one saw anything. No one knew anyone. Capone was arrested. "My wife told me to go, said it would do me good," he told the cops. "We barely walked in when 6 guys rushed us. They started shooting. 2 of my friends were killed. 1 got hit in the leg. I spent Christmas in jail." It was a holiday no one would forget. Mae had her son alive but permanently changed. Al sat behind bars, caught in another gang war dressed up as a night out. And though Mae clung to her son with the same devotion she always had, something inside her knew. She could no longer pretend the storm was outside. It was in the halls of her home. It had stained her Christmas. But Sonny would live, and that, for Mae Capone, was enough. How could Mae not forgive him? When Al wasn't behind bars or behind lies, he could be undeniably the kind of man a woman might cling to for sanity, charming, attentive, absurdly generous. Every year, like a crime world Kris Kringle, he turned up at Mafalda's private school in a chauffeured sleigh of stolen goodwill. Wearing a fine felt hat and a custom suit, more suited to a Senate hearing than a schoolyard, he distributed baskets brimming with candy and gifts to ecstatic children. Even the teachers weren't forgotten. Smiles bought with cigars and boxes of sweets, more effective than any bribe slipped in an envelope. In that moment, suspicion evaporated. No one ever interrogates generosity. To the neighbors, he was a mystery wrapped in a pleasant smile, calling himself a furniture dealer. No one really believed him, but they didn't need to. Al, in his bathrobe and slippers, tossing a ball to Sonny in the yard or stirring sauce in the kitchen with a glass of Chianti in hand, was the embodiment of domestic ease. He replaced Mae at the stove, kissed her on the cheek, and played the loving husband so well, even she believed the act. But the apron masked an empire. Since Torrio's retreat, Al Capone had become not just the head of the Chicago syndicate, he had become Chicago. Every police raid whispered his name. Every vice-ridden dive, every corpse in the alley bore his signature. Yet he was nowhere. The man was a shadow with a smile. Meanwhile, at 2135 South Michigan Avenue, in the gaudy heart of the New Lexington Hotel, Al ran the city like a CEO of sin. 3 entire floors were his. The 4th floor suite, 530, was his command post. Below it, the war room. Above, his inner sanctum, the room of vice. It came complete with a restaurant, a ballroom, a cinema, and a reinforced vault for when diplomacy failed. The decor was as loud as his legend, gilded walls, blood-red accents, a chandelier like a weaponized opera prop, and his initials, AC, etched into the oak floor like a royal crest. The bathroom? Nile green tiles with purple flourishes, because why stop at bad taste when you can charge through it? Capone lounged in silk pajamas and hosted soirees where politicians, gangsters, and entertainers dined and drank while bodyguards sealed off every exit. When he wished to eat in private, meals arrived on silver trolleys, and each dish was vetted by his staff, as though betrayal might be baked into the pasta. He was a king, and Chicago was his court. When not dialing lawyers or accountants, he vacationed in Miami, bet horses at Hideaways, or set sail in the Caribbean for business or pleasure. Al enjoyed the company of men for drinking and swearing, but he enjoyed the company of women even more. Sometimes he vanished for days. The reasons were never questioned, yet when he returned to Mae. She got the kiss, the embrace, the illusion of loyalty. The others, shadowy flings in speakeasies and suites, would never be photographed, never be mentioned. Mae was the only woman allowed to be seen beside the King of Chicago, and she wore that title like a crown made of silence. The Queen, it must be said, rarely graced the throne room. Mae Capone seldom set foot in the Lexington Hotel suite where her husband reigned supreme. The sight of bodyguards draped in trench coats with machine guns concealed under their arms unsettled her. This wasn't home. It was a war bunker with a minibar. But while Mae stayed away, other women did not. One, a voluptuous blonde from a suburban brothel known as the Greek, became a familiar face, if only behind locked doors and whispered entrances. One day, the Greek complained of aches in places polite company didn't mention. Al, ever the provider, sent her to his private physician, a man paid $85,000 a year to keep patients alive and secrets buried. The diagnosis was swift and ancient: syphilis. That medieval scourge of artists, soldiers, and libertines was back, and no less vicious. It could kill a child before birth, leave a woman sterile, or rot a brain from the inside out. Treatment meant injections of arsphenamine, an arsenic compound that offered false hope in a world of incurable disease. The doctor, piecing together the obvious biblical connection between his patient and his patron, gently suggested that Mr. Capone undergo testing. But the King of Chicago, who stared down rivals, cops, and judges, trembled at the thought of a hypodermic needle. He could face Thompson guns without blinking, but not a syringe. He felt fine, he insisted. And besides, what was a little arsenic between lovers? When not presiding from the Lexington, Al took refuge at the Hawthorne Inn in Cicero, the fortified heart of his empire's second capital. The mansion at 1600 South Austin Boulevard, with its steel doors, tunnel-connected garage, and 8-foot-high privacy wall, looked less like a house and more like a militarized estate. Inside, it was more of the same: liquor, laughter, and the constant shuffling of men with secrets in their pockets. To reporters, Al played the weary patriarch. The double life was exhausting, he said. The cat-and-mouse games between Chicago and Cicero were wearing him thin, straining his time with Mae. He saw her only 4 or 5 times a week now. That alone, he suggested, was punishment enough. But what grated more than exile was image. The newspapers, those meddlesome myth-makers, had crowned him Scarface, a nickname he loathed. He preferred the big fellow, a title that sounded more affable, less carved in blood. He used his charm as camouflage, a way to erase the jagged scar lines and lull strangers into forgetting the violence that trailed him like smoke. And Mae? What did she make of this man who needed to seduce every room he entered, be it full of cops, crooks, or call girls? No one really knows. One associate offered this: either she was too smart to complain, or too scared to speak. All she knew was that her husband sold fruit, or had a flower shop, or maybe ran a butcher store. That was it. Among men who built their kingdoms on loyalty and silence, women were cloaked in a different kind of invisibility. No one asked about their bruises, visible or otherwise. Yet no matter how far Al strayed, he always returned to Mae. And he always tried in his way to soothe the sting of betrayal, as if a kiss on the forehead could erase the lipstick on his collar. His kingdom was built on lies, but his home was a shrine to appearances. And in that shrine, Mae reigned not as partner, but as patron saint, silent, dignified, and untouched by the sins that paid the bills. In the spring of 1927, Al Capone, the most feared man in Chicago, retreated not to a fortress, but to Hot Springs, Arkansas. The spa town, famed for its mineral waters and scenic serenity, offered Capone a temporary sanctuary from the city that both fed him and hunted him. He arrived, as always, dressed for the part, double-breasted dark suit, tie knotted tight, felt hat tilted just right. Next to him, Mae posed dutifully for photos as they toured the springs like just another middle-class couple on holiday. One snapshot captures them in a donkey-drawn carriage in front of the aptly named Merry Hole. The donkey looks exhausted. Mae resigned. Al content. By day, Capone soaked in hot baths, played golf, and enjoyed the genteel trappings of bourgeois bliss. By night, the mask came off. He gambled with reckless abandon, $50,000 in one night, $58,000 the next. This wasn't recreation, it was a ritual. His golf partner wasn't Mae, but Vincent Drucci, the new head of the North Side gang and a man who'd once tried to kill him. Drucci, the schemer, was no lightweight. Born in 1898, he'd served in the Navy during World War I before graduating to petty crime, then full-fledged bootlegging. His daring eyes and thick eyebrows masked a ruthless ambition. He'd been part of the ambush that killed Capone's driver and had helped orchestrate the attack that nearly ended Johnny Torrio. His presence in Hot Springs was no coincidence. While Capone lounged, politics roared in Chicago. The upcoming mayoral election loomed large. Capone, still stinging from Democrat William Deaver's crackdown, was all in for Republican William Hale, Big Bill Thompson, a man more amenable to organized vice. With Thompson having won the first round on February 22nd, Al wisely kept out of the crossfire, awaiting the April 5th showdown. Drucci, however, saw Capone's rural retreat as an opening. He smuggled an arsenal into Hot Springs, shotguns, automatics, enough firepower to start a war. On March 14, 1927, in what was considered neutral territory in the underworld, a city where no gangster was supposed to be armed, he tried to kill Capone in broad daylight. But once again, Mae's quiet prayers won the day. Al walked away untouched. Drucci disappeared. No one spoke. Silence, after all, was the foundation of their world. Good enemies made good business. Capone's outfit, nicknamed for their sharp suits and sharper operations, was now estimated by federal prosecutors to pull in $105 million a year. That level of wealth didn't just fund palaces, it bought silence, protection, and immunity. But silence ended on April 4th. Drucci, in a final act of chaos, was caught vandalizing a polling station on the eve of the runoff election. Chicago turned into an armed camp, 5,000 police, bombed candidate headquarters, and snipers atop rooftops. Dragged to court by an officer who gripped him too hard, Drucci fought back. Handcuffed and livid, he hurled insults. The cop responded with a fist. Drucci resisted. The officer drew his gun. The schemer was shot in the leg, stomach, and arm. He collapsed, his ambition bleeding out on the courtroom floor. In true mob fashion, Drucci's funeral was a spectacle. $10,000 for a silver-plated coffin, $30,000 in flowers, piled so high they drowned the Sparbaro funeral home, and a procession that stretched like a royal wake. He joined Dino Banyan at Mount Carmel Cemetery, interred with all the pomp crime could buy. Capone didn't attend, but he had already won. With Drucci gone and Big Bill Thompson elected mayor the next day, Al Capone wasn't just the king in exile. He was the emperor returning to his throne. And business, once again, was booming. After surviving assassination attempts, election turmoil, and yet another blood-soaked chapter of gangland drama, Al Capone decided he'd had enough, at least for now. In December 1927, he whisked Mae away on a clandestine vacation to recover from the chaos, choosing sea air over smoke-filled backrooms. On December 8th, flanked by 2 loyal bodyguards, the couple quietly boarded a train. But before vanishing into the rails, Capone staged one final scene, his version of a public farewell. Standing before journalists in a Chicago hotel, he delivered a monologue, half confession, half threat. 90% of the people in Chicago drink and gamble. I've just tried to give them good booze and honest games. And how am I thanked? I've spent the best years of my life as a public benefactor, and now I live like a hunted man. Then came the sarcasm, polished and sharp. They call me a killer? Fine, I'm leaving. I suppose now the murders will stop. No more alcohol, no more craps or roulette. Let the fine citizens of Chicago find their own liquor. I'm tired of this job. Capone was bidding adieu to Chicago like a jilted lover. The irony wasn't subtle, and the bitterness lingered. A woman in England wrote me today. Even there, they think I'm a gorilla. She offered to pay for my trip to London if I'd kill her neighbors. Then, his exit line, meant to sound noble, almost sacrificial. My wife and my mother have heard enough. You might as well all become drunkards. Mae took it as a turning point, a romantic gesture from a man desperate for redemption, escaping the chill of Chicago and the ghosts of gang wars past. This wasn't just a vacation, it was a declaration. They were going to start fresh, somewhere far from bullet casings and betrayal. He told the world they were heading to St. Petersburg, Florida. But Al Capone, master of misdirection, didn't board a train south. He went west, to Los Angeles. It took reporters days to track them. By the time the truth surfaced, the Capones had checked into the lavish Biltmore Hotel under the name Al Brown. The Renaissance-style palace in the heart of downtown LA was all marble fountains, crystal chandeliers, frescoes, and carved ceilings, a gilded echo of Italy that thrilled Al. For Mae, it felt like a dream. They toured movie studios. Al, delighted, played the guide, pointing out celebrity mansions as if he belonged there. They journeyed to Tijuana for the horse races, a perfect treat for Mae, who loved riding. But their anonymity didn't last. Scarface's shadow traveled faster than the train. Soon, word spread. Protesters appeared. The city stirred with unease. Barely 24 hours after their arrival, the Biltmore's manager, polite but firm, asked the couple to leave. Mae packed in silence as the guards outside their suite kept watch, tense and ready. The illusion of a peaceful escape dissolved under the weight of notoriety. Was this how it would always be? No matter where they ran, would Al's past knock louder than any hotel concierge? Mae had dreamed of a husband on vacation. What she had was a fugitive on tour. The illusion of luxury tourism shattered within hours. Los Angeles made one thing unmistakably clear. It had no room for Al Capone. On December 15, 1927, the city's top cop, Chief James Davis, delivered the message himself, blunt, unambiguous, and cold as steel. You are not welcome here. He wasn't bluffing. Davis personally dispatched officers to assist with the Capone's abrupt departure. Mae, visibly shaken, packed while uniformed men stood in her suite like polite executioners. No red carpet, no fanfare, just an escort to the Santa Fe train station. Al, always the showman, couldn't resist the stage. We're tourists. I thought you guys liked tourists, he quipped to reporters. I've got money made in Chicago to spend here. Who ever heard of someone being kicked out of Los Angeles with cash in their pocket? It was classic Capone, playing the misunderstood gentleman, a mobster with manners, and it worked. Even the journalists who once cursed his name now scribbled his parting words with a smile. But Al's instincts, sharpened by betrayal and blood, twitched. Before boarding, he called Ralph, his ever-watchful brother, who confirmed a chilling rumor. Chicago police were waiting at the next stop. Capone changed their plans in an instant. The train would halt at Joliet. Ralph would meet them with a car for a quiet return home. The ruse didn't hold. On December 16th, 1927, as the train rolled into Joliet, police swarmed. 5 bodyguards were seized. Al tried to flee, dragging Mae in one hand, his revolver in the other, an unusual detail for a man who rarely carried weapons himself. Another bodyguard cleared a path, but officers quickly closed in. Al Capone was arrested for the first time on a charge that might finally stick: illegal possession of a firearm. Mae stood frozen, her husband yanked from her side and booked like a common thug. The pedestal she'd placed him on began to crumble. She had always seen him as invincible, untouchable by law, protected by power. Now, he sat behind bars, in a cell with 2 vagrants, reduced to just another inmate. The shame clung to her like smoke. What would she tell Sonny? What would people say? Mae was released and allowed to return to Chicago, alone. The image of Al sitting on a stained bench next to 2 filthy strangers haunted her the entire journey. For his part, Al didn't suffer fools or smells lightly. He offered to pay the vagrants bail, not out of kindness, but because their odor offended him. "It's certainly a lesson teaching me not to carry a revolver with me in Joliet," he said with that same defiant grin that drove judges mad and journalists wild. The judge was, predictably, unamused. But as far as local law was concerned, if Capone's crimes happened outside his district, they were somebody else's problem. Scarface had been caged, if only briefly. Back in Chicago, Mae Capone lived with the gnawing dread that her husband's invincibility had finally cracked. Al's short stint in jail had shifted something fundamental. The king of crime had, for a brief moment, been caged, and the world had noticed. To her, this wasn't just a hiccup in his legend. It was a warning. The outfit's obscene profits had painted a target not only on Al's back, but across his empire. Envy had turned allies into informants, and worse, Capone, with his love for headlines and tailored arrogance, couldn't resist the lure of the limelight. But crime cannot thrive under flashbulbs. Notoriety invites scrutiny, and scrutiny draws knives. By January 1928, the couple was planning their next escape, not from lawmen, but from fate. This time, Al beat the press to it. In Miami, where the sun was hot and the politics cooler, he arrived as both fugitive and philanthropist. "The climate in Miami is healthier than Chicago's, warmer than California's. That's why I'm here," he told a gaggle of reporters right outside the police station, his first stop upon stepping off the train. Dressed in crisp blue pleated trousers, hands in pockets, he looked more like a man hunting for a golf course than fleeing prosecution. "I love Miami so much. I'm staying here all winter. Just waiting for my wife, mother, and son. They're arriving this afternoon. We're planning to buy a house." The line might have been funny had it not been delivered on the precinct steps, but Al knew how to play the game. By preemptively checking in with the police, he outmaneuvered them. No raids, no headlines, just a criminal with a very sunny excuse. Mae, Sonny, and Mama Capone joined him soon after. They rented a seaside bungalow for $2,500 for the season. Mae strolled with Sonny freely, unbothered by tailing detectives. The sea air, warm and anonymous, gave her back a freedom she hadn't tasted since Brooklyn. But paradise doesn't come without whispers. The bungalow's owner was horrified to learn that the genteel Browns were actually the Capones. She expected wild parties, machine guns under mattresses, and mobsters swimming in gin. What she got instead was a house cleaner than when it had been rented, adorned with porcelain, silverware, and a few bottles of wine left like parting gifts. Then came the phone bill, hundreds of dollars in long-distance calls to Chicago. Rage turned to opportunity. She was ready to complain to the press. But before she could, a Cadillac Cunningham rolled up to her door. Out stepped a slim, sun-kissed blonde. "I'm Mrs. Capone," said the soft voice. She handed over $1,000. "Keep the change. We may have broken a few things. This should cover it." Scandal averted. The coast had worked its magic. The Capones weren't just vacationing, they were relocating. Al fell for a neoclassical gem at 93 Palm Avenue on Palm Island, a man-made slice of paradise floating in Biscayne Bay. The house, built in 1922 by a beer magnate, how poetic, boasted white stucco, a green-tiled roof, mosaic patios, a private dock and 14 bedrooms. Capone agreed to buy it for $40,000, paying in 4 annual installments at 8% interest. Even the mayor lent a hand. But true to form, Al left no paper trail, no license, no deed, no account, just whispers and winks. His survival depended on vanishing in plain sight. He had traded the bitter winds of Chicago for the illusion of peace. And for Mae, that illusion, however thin, was worth everything. On April 4th, 1928, the deed to 93 Palm Avenue was filed not under the name of the most feared gangster in America, but under his wife's. Mae Capone, in one clean stroke of penmanship and legal sleight of hand, became the official owner of a fortified island palace, cloaked in subtropical calm and 2.5-meter concrete walls, built not for privacy, but survival. For Al, the walls were protection from machine gun fire. For Mae, they marked the border between chaos and sanctuary. Inside, Mae began transforming the fortress into her own Versailles. Her first move, aesthetic diplomacy. She ordered the construction of a lily pond with an arched bridge, a nod to Monet's serenity, not her husband's notoriety. A mosaic-tiled pool, one of the largest on the Florida coast, shimmered beneath the palms, complete with a 2-story changing pavilion. While Al secured the perimeter, Mae claimed the soul of the house. She chose curtains, brass light fixtures, and Art Deco flourishes. Shopping became a compulsion, a freedom she had long been denied under the shadow of Teresa and Mafalda. And the local merchants were only too happy to feed the fantasy. Cash flowed as easily as the wine in Al's cellar. But the Capones didn't come to integrate. When they entertained, it was strictly on their terms. A few close friends, some potential allies. To the surprise of their guests, revolutionary hardware, submachine guns, rested alongside Rococo armchairs. Mae, now accustomed to grandeur, still grimaced at the presence of those gorillas trailing them through town. Al played the affable host. For Sonny's birthday, 50 classmates descended upon the island estate. The gangster's mansion, decked in balloons and streamers, became a wonderland. Children splashed in the enormous pool, everyone except Sonny, who couldn't swim. Mae watched like a lifeguard and a mother hen, urging the others not to leave her boy behind. The feast? Fried chicken, cakes, soda, simple Americana soaked in irony. Permission slips had been required. The Godfather, after all, knew liability. Al slipped comfortably into his roles as doting father and attentive husband. Mae watched him beam on his new speedboat, the sea wind whipping his slicked-back hair. Mae, now fully in command of her domain, moved with the ease of a society matron. No in-laws to overshadow her, no mob wives to obey. She was chauffeur-driven in a gleaming blue Cadillac, served by a household of black staff in the segregationist South. Her dream life had arrived, gilded and guarded. But Florida, like Chicago, does not suffer illusions for long. The peace shattered when the deed, signed in her name, surfaced in public records. The press pounced. So much for discretion. The arrangement sparked scandal. The mayor, who had quietly facilitated Capone's acquisition, found himself hounded. Outrage spread. The Capones, who had aimed for anonymity, were once again infamous. Mae's paradise, her private Trianon, now lay under siege, not by bullets this time, but by headlines. As 1928 gave way to 1929, Mae Capone clung desperately to the last threads of peace on Palm Island. 5 police officers now trailed her husband's every step, ordered by a city council eager to be rid of him. But back in Chicago, a reckoning brewed. On March 12, 1929, Capone was ordered to testify before a grand jury investigating the Valentine's Day massacre, the bloodbath that left 7 men dead and police stunned. It was a chance to corner Scarface at last. But his lawyers produced a convenient illness. Bronchopneumonia, allegedly contracted in Miami, had left him bedridden for over a month. The judge showed mercy. Al was resummoned for March 20th, but federal agents smelled deceit. They tracked his footprints from the horse tracks of Miami to sun-drenched outings in the Bimini Islands and Nassau. He'd been gallivanting across the tropics with a vitality that mocked his forged sickbed. If he skipped the second summons, they would come for him. Finally, it seemed, the walls were closing in. Capone, however, returned to Chicago with his usual flair. He appeared on March 20th, then again on March 27th, testifying and walking free. Despite their conviction, federal prosecutors had no evidence linking him to the massacre. Frustrated, they changed their angle. As he left the courtroom, federal agents pounced. The charge? Contempt of court. A technicality, tiny in comparison to his actual crimes, but with teeth. 1 year in prison, $1,000 fine. Al, never one to carry just a few bucks, coolly dropped $5,000 on the desk and strolled out. But the hunt had begun. That May, Capone attended what would become the founding moment of the modern American underworld, the Atlantic City Conference. 40 of the most powerful gangsters in the country convened in secret, not to exchange pleasantries, but to forge a mafia federation, the Syndicate. Jewish, Irish, Italian, and American mobs agreed to unite against their common enemy, the US government. After the summit, he and his bodyguards headed toward New York. Somewhere south of Camden, New Jersey, their car broke down. Stranded, they caught a movie at the Stanley Theatre in Philadelphia while waiting for a train. At 8:15 p.m., as the lights came on, 2 local officers spotted Capone and moved in. Al, in typical deadpan, greeted them. "Good evening. I have a gun on me." So did his bodyguard, Frankie Rio. That was enough. Brought immediately before a judge, Capone met a man immune to charm or fear. Authorities in some cities may fear you, but not in Philadelphia. Al Capone, Philadelphia isn't afraid of you, and neither am I. You're a killer. My only regret is that you're not here on charges that would allow me to rid this country of you. The gavel dropped with a $35,000 bail, steep, even for Scarface. He whistled in admiration. At last, someone had assigned him a price tag worthy of the myth. With just $30 in his pocket, the man who once commanded Chicago like a medieval lord was forced to spend the night in a Philadelphia jail. By morning, he was before the judge again, still standing tall, still smiling. "Well, this is what I call a city. They work fast here," he joked, his tone balancing on the knife edge between defiance and admiration. To the press, he projected confidence bordering on theatrical arrogance. "I'll be cleared," he told them. "No charge has ever been brought against me that hasn't been quashed." But when investigators pressed him, "Why the gun?" the tone shifted. "I'm a target," he replied, more subdued. "I'm under death threat. That's why." Philadelphia's justice system didn't blink. For once, Capone's charm failed him. He was sentenced to a year in prison for carrying a concealed weapon, a sentence that rocked the country. The myth had finally been sentenced, but Al Capone wasn't broken. If anything, he was relieved. "I'm like any other man," he confided to the assistant prosecutor. "I've been in the racket long enough to know that a man in my position sometimes needs to rest from the misfortunes of war." He spoke of the killings, the paranoia, the relentless tension. Atlantic City, he admitted, hadn't been a pleasure trip. He'd registered under a false name to avoid being gunned down by rivals. The violence never stopped. Even paradise came with crosshairs. "Once you're in the mafia," he muttered, "you're in it forever." In Capone's mind, prison wasn't a punishment. It was a sabbatical, a calculated withdrawal from a battlefield that had become dangerously volatile. He handed a diamond ring to the assistant prosecutor and asked him to send it to Ralph in case he didn't survive prison. And with that, the man who built an empire on fear walked quietly into confinement. The next morning's headlines buzzed with speculation. Had Capone chosen prison? Had he accepted protective custody disguised as punishment? Would the government finally break him? Back at 7244 South Prairie Avenue, the Capone women staged a media blitz. But one voice was missing, Mae's. From Florida, where she and Sonny had remained until the scandal broke, Mae spoke with a kind of disoriented disbelief. "Al never goes to prison. Why would he want to? He loves talking about Europe, about Palm Beach, about boxing, not prison." She hadn't even known about Atlantic City or Philadelphia. The last time they'd been together was in Chicago after Miami. He'd said he was going away for a while, but not where and not why. She hadn't asked. Now everything was upside down. Mae had endured years of late nights and vague answers, but this, Al behind bars, truly held away from her, was a foreign horror. Joliet had been a blip. Charges in New York and Chicago, whispers of murder and bootlegging, trifles. But this? This was real. And it shook her faith in the one certainty she had always clung to, that Al Capone, no matter how much blood stained his empire, was untouchable. For the first time, Mae Capone's silence broke. The shy Irish woman, so long defined by restraint and discretion, stepped out of the shadows, not as a gangster's wife, but as a mother. America's Mrs. Scarface now spoke directly to the nation, and not with defiance, but with heartbreak. Their son, Sonny, just 11, came home crying each day, mocked by classmates for being the child of a murderer. "It's more than he can bear. It's more than I can bear," she told the press. "His heart is broken, and he doesn't understand. I'm a real mother, and I suffer with him. Can anything be done?" It was not a legal plea. It was maternal anguish, a desperate attempt to show the country that behind Al Capone's shadow loomed a woman and a child bruised by the spotlight. Joined by Teresa and Mafalda, Mae even found the courage to visit Al at Holmesburg Penitentiary, ready to uproot her life to stay near him. But the cruel arithmetic of prison life allowed only one visit per month. Mail could arrive endlessly, but replies were rationed, 2 per month. Even Scarface had to bow to the bureaucracy. Still, Al had no intention of serving his sentence quietly. He offered a $50,000 reward to any lawyer who could spring him. "The worst part is the constant reminder that I'm in prison," he told anyone who'd listen. "The less I say, the faster they'll forget." But the man who once made himself unforgettable could no longer disappear. Desperation, paranoia, and indignation bled from his jail cell. "I just want to visit my wife and my son," he cried. "I feel very, very bad. I've never done anything wrong. I'm going back to Chicago. No one can stop me unless they shoot me in the head." By August, the government quietly moved him to the imposing Eastern State Penitentiary, a medieval fortress of turrets and thick stone walls. The real reason? Assassination threats. There were whispers that enemies inside Holmesburg were planning to finish what Chicago rivals had failed to do. But Mae wasn't told. All she knew was that she could now visit more often. Inside Eastern State, Al shed the gangster armor for something closer to comfort. He donned the standard-issue canvas blue, but his cell told another story. Rugs, oil paintings, a polished wood desk, and an upholstered armchair turned his prison into a private suite. He read Napoleon's biography and played the part of philosopher king behind bars. At Christmas, he donated food baskets and bought raffle tickets for charity. Even in confinement, Al Capone understood optics. On March 17, 1930, at the Little Florence restaurant, the king returned. He greeted guests with theatrical cheer. "Make yourselves comfortable. The others will be here soon." His release for good behavior was more than a homecoming. It was a coronation. At 31, Al Capone had faced prison, stared it down, and walked out with his legend intact. The celebration blurred the lines between intimacy and intimidation. 200 guests filled a banquet hall transformed into a single long table, lined with white linen, silverware, and flower arrangements. In a back room, a hidden speakeasy poured champagne and contraband beer. Then came the Capone women. Teresa, Mae, and Mafalda entered arm in arm, a triumphant procession of power and matriarchy. The contrast between the two matriarchs, Neapolitan and Irish, was striking. Teresa, dark, round, smiling, sparkled with diamonds. Mae, pale and slender, said little. Her greying hair betrayed the toll of years spent in fear. She smiled, but her eyes never left Al. And when he asked for more champagne, she grimaced. He laughed. She smiled again. But the worry in her face never left. She feared rightly that this banquet might be short-lived. The police were waiting. Upon his release, the chief of police made it clear Capone was no longer welcome in Chicago. Stay, and he'd be arrested again. Days later, Miami police raided his Palm Island villa, seizing every bottle they found. In Chicago, over 300 men suspected of being tied to Capone were rounded up, some armed to the teeth, others merely loyal. The empire was cracking. The shadow had grown too large, and Mae, who once believed her husband could never be caged, now watched as his kingdom was hunted from all sides. Her Trianon, her sanctuary, was no longer safe. The man she adored was still dancing, but the music, she feared, was coming to an end. The night of March 17th, 1930, closed not with a bang, but with quiet. Al Capone, having dined with 200 guests and basked in the glow of apparent impunity, retreated to his Lexington hotel suite. There, within the comfort of thick walls and loyal men, he sat with Mae, the silent queen beside the scarred king. The next morning, Capone welcomed a journalist, an audience he craved as much as he manipulated. He wasn't a killer, he insisted, just a businessman. "My only crime," he said with theatrical solemnity, "was selling beer and whiskey to very respectable people." It was the same script, polished over years, not a gangster, not a murderer, just a man responding to supply and demand. When asked about his arrest in Philadelphia, he rolled his eyes. "Not for carrying a gun, but because my name is Capone. I've never been charged before. Why would I be?" Then, pivoting, he reached for every man's morality. "If your brother or father were in trouble, would you sit there and twiddle your thumbs?" He pressed a button. A door opened. "Ask my wife and sister to come in." The journalist, heart racing, expected to meet myth. What she saw were two women, one tall, slim, silent, Mae, the other short, round, radiant, Mafalda. They smiled politely and left behind scraps of blue silk, details the journalist clutched at in lieu of scandal. Capone, always the showman, redirected her gaze. "Did you notice my wife's hair? She's only 28 and it's grey. Because of worry, because of this business. Because of him." Outside, Chicago was being methodically purged. If Capone could not be imprisoned, he could be suffocated. His name was no longer just a target, it was the bullseye. But Mae didn't know what was coming. Not yet. In the White House, President Herbert Hoover had long lost patience. Chicago's blood ran too freely. Capone's wealth was now estimated at $75 million. His influence unmatched. The law failed. The witnesses vanished. The bullets never missed. But if his empire was built on money, then money would be the key. "It is ironic," Hoover remarked, "that a man guilty of hundreds of murders should be punished simply for failing to comply with tax laws." And so a new war began. Not of guns, but of ledgers. To carry out this financial crusade, the Bureau of Investigation turned to Alexander Jamie, who pointed to a young man still living with his parents, earning $2,800 a year, his son-in-law, Elliot Ness. Ness was no gangster. Clean-cut, soft-spoken, with a middle part and a degree in economics, he looked more like a bank teller than a bounty hunter. But beneath the Boy Scout exterior was resolve honed in raids and barroom brawls. On September 28, 1929, Ness received his marching orders: destroy the Capone machine from the inside out. Not with bullets, but with paperwork. He was given carte blanche to assemble a team, outsiders, incorruptible, unseduced by cash or fear. Most would be under 30. None would be married. The mission would consume them. In a city where 1/3 of prohibition agents had already sold their loyalty to Capone, Ness would build something new, a brotherhood immune to bribery. A small, unbreakable unit. They would become legend. But to Al Capone, they would become something worse. They would become a threat he could not buy. Elliot Ness, the untouchable face of the government's war against Al Capone, had broken his own rule before the battle had even begun. In defiance of his directive to remain single, free of the distractions and vulnerabilities that love brings, he married Edna Staley, his high school sweetheart. Their romance bloomed quietly, away from the grit of raids and wiretaps, in the soft-lit corridors of her secretarial job at Alexander Jamie's office. Within months, he proposed over dinner in a grand Chicago restaurant on her 23rd birthday. The marriage, humble and civil, was not meant to be a political act, but it would become one. Their life was quaint, even idyllic. Opera on the radio, Conan Doyle on the floor, 6 cats prowling the modest Cleveland villa. Ness, the man who would try to tear down the criminal colossus of Chicago, spent his nights not polishing pistols but sharing poetry. For Edna, this was the dream. Security, literature, weekends by Lake Erie and dinners at the Vogue Room. But dreams collapse quickly under the weight of a public war. March 17, 1930. While Scarface holds court at Little Florence, Elliot Ness is preparing for war. Capone's empire of breweries, bullets, and blood must fall, and Ness's squad, hand-picked and incorruptible, is ready to strike. Capone responds the only way he knows how, with money. A quiet intermediary approaches Ness with an envelope, 2 $1,000 bills, and a weekly promise of more if he just looks the other way. For Capone, it's business as usual. For Ness, it's a declaration of war. "Tell them that Ness cannot be bought," he roars. "Not for $2,000 a week, not for $10,000, not for $100,000, not for all the money that has ever passed through their greasy hands." But incorruptibility is not invincibility. Wiretaps confirm the inevitable. Capone has put a target on Ness. The outfit plots not to bribe him, but to bury him. Ness acts fast. Edna, his love, his mistake, is moved to a secure hotel south of the city with armed guards and 6 bewildered cats. The comfort of bourgeois life is shattered. Edna, like Mae before her, becomes a prisoner of her husband's enemies. One night, Ness makes the error of reaching for a normal life. He picks her up, takes her to dinner, and drives into the countryside. Behind them, headlights emerge, relentless. A tale. He weaves through back roads, avoiding speed and sudden moves, terrified of a stray bullet. But chivalry clashes with war. Edna, sensing the strangeness of their endless drive, questions him. He lies. He must. When she's safely back at the hotel, he readies himself. Moments later, the tale draws close. A shot cracks the night air. Ness floors the gas, swerves, returns fire. Another shot, another miss. The shadows vanish, but the message remains. They could have taken him. Or worse, her. And it escalates. Dynamite under his car's exhaust, threats by phone, letters soaked in menace. The outfit doesn't just want him gone, they want him broken. Ness holds, but Edna does not. The strain twists her nerves like wire. She retreats, mentally and physically, back to Cleveland. The public wife disappears. The incorruptible man remains. But the cost of his purity is written on his wife's silence. Fueled by adversity and determined to win the battle for public opinion, Eliot Ness intensified his campaign against Capone's bootlegging strongholds, targeting those so well fortified they were believed to be untouchable. In March 1931, he launched one of his boldest offensives. Intelligence had revealed that Al Capone was hiding a significant brewery at 1632 South Cicero Avenue. At dawn, a column of black sedans snaked through the snow-covered streets. Leading them, a truck. In the passenger seat, wearing a leather helmet like a football player preparing for war, sat Ness himself. The plan was as brutal as it was symbolic. If the doors would not open, they would be shattered. Ness raised his hand. The driver floored the accelerator. With a deafening roar of metal, wood and rubber, the truck crashed into Capone's kingdom, smashing through its barricades. Later, Ness went one step further. He turned confiscated evidence into a pageant of humiliation. Beer barrels, Capone's liquid gold, were loaded onto trucks and paraded through the streets of Chicago. Ness, never missing a theatrical opportunity, called the Lexington Hotel personally that morning, asked for Capone, and advised him to look out the window at precisely 11 a.m. Every truck gleamed like a showroom model. The Untouchables rode in the lead car, followed by vehicles seized from Capone's own fleet. It was warfare by humiliation, a victory parade designed to crush Scarface's pride. And it worked. As the trucks rolled by, Al Capone erupted into a fury so wild that his own men had to restrain him. Ness had struck deep, not just into the heart of Capone's empire, but into the fragile ego of the man himself. But in grinding down the gangster, Ness had also ground down his marriage. His obsession became Edna's torment. Their home, a quiet cottage at Bay Village on Lake Erie, was an hour from Cleveland, and Ness's 16-hour days meant he was rarely there. The quiet weekends, the walks among other people's children, each moment reminded Edna of what she didn't have. She longed for a child, and the ache of that emptiness grew unbearable. Arguments became routine, the emotional chasm widened. Eventually, Eliot left. He gave the press a tidy soundbite. It was a mutual decision. We both realized a mistake had been made and decided to correct it. But Edna was shattered. She would never remarry. She would keep his name. She had loved him too deeply to let go in spirit, even after he was gone in flesh. The man who symbolized moral clarity and prohibition purity had, in the privacy of his own life, started drinking. Meanwhile, hundreds of kilometers away, Mae Capone and Edna Staley were bound by an invisible thread of silent suffering. Both had lost peace. Both were casualties of men locked in a war with no victors. Where Edna gave up, Mae clung on, perhaps because her love for Sonny was the glue that kept her world from collapsing. And then came the death knell. The US government, in a masterstroke of bureaucratic vengeance, officially named Al Capone Public Enemy Number 1, the first man in the country to receive the title. The label was not just a legal formality, it was a declaration of war. His empire had begun to buckle under the weight of relentless raids, rising paranoia, and a trail of tax forms finally being read with the scrutiny they deserved. Mae Capone, reading the morning papers, found her hair whiter by the second. The New York Times headline said it all. Capone indicted for tax fraud. Her husband was accused of defrauding the federal government of $215,080 and trafficking in alcohol in open defiance of prohibition. The indictment was backed by a 2-year investigation. Every detail of Capone's income between 1924 and 1929 laid bare, line by incriminating line. The walls were closing in. The pressure, now insurmountable, began cracking the silence of the outfit. Capone's own men, sensing the tide turning, began flipping to save themselves. Ralph Capone, his brother and trusted lieutenant, had just been sentenced to 3 years for the same crime, a public warning that loyalty had an expiration date. With no more options, Al turned himself in to the city marshal, flanked by his lawyer. He posted $50,000 bail, walked out of the station, and stepped into history, not as the invincible king of vice, but as a man finally summoned to account for the empire he built on blood, beer, and silence. The next day, June 7th, 1931, Palm Island no longer feels like a tropical haven, but a battlefield. The sheriff raids the Capone residence and, in front of a stunned Mae, seizes the furniture, her prized possessions, hand-picked to make a home, not a fortress. A lawyer is demanding $50,000 in unpaid fees from her husband. But since Capone keeps his fortune as well hidden as a buried body, the government grants permission for direct seizure. In the sacred codes of the underworld, family was always off limits, no longer. The message couldn't be clearer. The gloves are off. Even Mae and Sonny are fair game now. Capone's code is dead. A new one rules scorched earth. On June 17th, 1931, in a courtroom presided over by Judge James Herbert Wilkerson, Al Capone pleads guilty. His lawyers hope for a deal. 3 years, tops. A white-collar punishment for a blood-soaked empire. His appearance, dressed in a sulfur-colored suit, becomes a symbolic moment in Eliot Ness's crusade. A visual of surrender, or so it seems. 2 weeks later, on June 30th, Capone wrings one last delay from the court. Just 1 more month to be near his ailing son. The trial is now set for October 6th. Sympathy, like bribery, is a currency Capone knows how to spend. That morning, Al wakes at 7:45 in his suite at the Lexington Hotel. He showers, shaves, and dresses in a tailored blue suit. Mae and Sonny, flown in from Miami, are present. But the lawyers decide Mae should stay behind. Not because she lacks loyalty, because she lacks stage presence. Too timid, too pale under the flashbulbs. Her sadness, sincere and bottomless, would be a liability. She stays behind, watching the man she married walk alone into history. Until now, Capone had worn a mask of serenity, but he knew the game had changed. "They want a show," he said bitterly, "with tricks and drama, tears and screams. It's absurd. No man my age could have done all they say I did. I'm a ghost invented by a million minds." Outside the courthouse, a circus awaits. 40 police officers form a cordon. Spectators pack the streets. Journalists jostle for position. They all want a glimpse of public enemy number one. Capone, cool as ever, lights a cigar and enters the courthouse like it's opening night on Broadway. His footsteps echo in the marble halls of Judge Wilkerson's court. Ancient columns frame the stage. He wears a suit so sharp it could be a weapon. White pocket square, gold chain strung with diamonds, a brown and white tie. He smiles faintly. He still believes charm might save him. Each day of the trial, he changes suits like armor. A pinstripe ensemble becomes the talk of the courtroom. The fashion show is closely watched, not for style, but for symbolism. Every fabric, every stitch screams money, at a time when money is poison. The prosecution barely had to lift a finger. The jury, steeped in hardship, needed only to hear that Mrs. Capone had paid $6,000 in cash for a swimming pool and garage, no less, in their Miami winter palace. Mr. Capone, they claimed, had paid over $3,000 just for telephone calls in 1929. Yes, he had donated $15,600 to the church and another $58,000 to the Police Widows and Orphans Fund. But who cares about strategic philanthropy when all you can smell is excess? The nation's tolerance for vice had rotted away. Now, they wanted blood. On October 24, 1931, 2 years to the day after Wall Street's collapse, the jury rendered its verdict. 9 hours of deliberation sealed Capone's fate. In the dead of night, a messenger arrived at his Lexington hotel suite. He dressed in a dark purple suit, white fedora, and matching pocket square. Mae and Sonny were by his side. Her heart pounded. At 10 a.m., the sentence came: 11 years in prison. Al's face darkened, swallowed by shadow. His hands clenched involuntarily. The hit was brutal, but Scarface refused to crumble. No tantrum, no collapse. He held the pose, and then one final insult. As he exited the courtroom, dazed, a man shoved a document into his hands, a request for 2 mortgages on their Miami estate, one in his name, the other Mae's. The government was moving to claim every last cent. She would not be allowed to sell the home. The money trail had to stay frozen. Capone, stunned, exploded. He spat obscenities at the man, tried to kick him. Onlookers recoiled. The press pounced. He turned to the reporters, voice laced with venom and prophecy. "It is truly a shame to disappoint the public," he said, bitterness dripping, "to destroy one of its popular myths." Then he looked beyond himself, to a crumbling country. "It's going to be a terrible winter," he warned. "America is on the verge of its greatest social upheaval." The camera shutters clicked, hunting the image of the century, Capone in chains. But the gangster paused, softening. "Please," he pleaded, "think of my family. Don't take my picture like this." The reporters respected his wish, all but one. Al lunged for a bucket of water and hurled it, howling, "I'm going to tear you apart." Guards intervened just in time. Cook County Prison, America's latest fortress of law and order, waited for its most infamous guest. Towering over 390,000 square meters, it housed 9,000 souls, a marvel of steel and concrete, immune, supposedly, to breakout or corruption. Its warden, David Moneypenny, crowed in the papers, "No one escapes, no one gets favors, but even iron walls have cracks." Mae Capone walked those echoing corridors, Sonny's hand in hers. She passed the rows of cells, her elegance stark against the backdrop of concrete and despair. She stopped at one. Inside, Al had reclaimed his kingdom. He'd brought the Lexington with him, lampshades, Art Deco furniture, rugs, a radio, paintings. He even put up Christmas garlands. An angel crowned the tree in the cell's corner. Mae and Sonny settled in. Al had dinner brought in and arranged for a black butler to serve them. If the world was determined to call him a villain, then he would dine like royalty behind bars. Since his incarceration on October 24th, Scarface has been anything but anonymous behind bars. The state may have sentenced him, but Cook County Prison treated him like a guest of honor, albeit one locked in a cell. A generously sized one, no less, perched on the 5th floor in a secluded wing that houses just a dozen inmates while the rest of the prison groans under the weight of overcrowding. The gangster turned prisoner continues to feast like a free man. Every day, Mae sends meals from her kitchen, steaming stews, buttered bread, kidneys hot enough to melt steel. The scent alone could start a riot on the lower floors. Mae, for her part, isn't forgotten either. Weekly deliveries arrive like clockwork, envelopes stuffed with cash, courtesy of the outfit's unspoken pension plan for the mafia's first lady. $25,000 a year, blood money, neatly packaged, to ensure she lives in dignity while her husband remains behind bars. It is hush money, honor money, survival money. But tonight, no amount of cash or imported furnishings can soften Mae's first Christmas in prison. The walls are adorned with garlands, the table set, the butler waiting, but something's broken. Al has always been by her side, the last man to allow harm to even brush her sleeve. Now, she sits in a cell wrapped in holiday cheer and dread. There's a glimmer of hope. The lawyers have petitioned the Supreme Court. One last appeal stands between her and despair. From his cell-turned command center, Al still rules. The telegraph hums, phone lines buzz, orders are issued and carried out. He may be caged, but the outfit continues to breathe under his control. And since the boss can't go to the streets come to him. Foot traffic through the prison reaches absurd levels. Warden David Moneypenny, who once promised a corruption-free sanctuary of steel, now seems to have discovered that even principles can be monetized. Just 2 days before Christmas, on December 22nd, the same Moneypenny was spotted pushing a 16-cylinder Cadillac to its limits on the road between Springfield and Chicago. He pushed too hard. The engine blew. When the mechanic pried open the hood and checked the paperwork, the name on the ownership record left him slack-jawed. Mae Capone. The man did what any honest citizen might do. He called the authorities. But the story vanished. Silenced. One assumes that in return for a little indulgence in prison protocol, Al's meals continued to arrive piping hot. A mafia twist on oil for food. A small comfort in a life now ruled by concrete and clocks. On Christmas Eve, the cell glows with soft light. Business is not discussed in front of the women, and they are arriving now. Among them, Louise Rolfe, infamously known as the Blonde Alibi, her arm threaded through that of Jack McGurn, the man suspected of orchestrating the St. Valentine's Day massacre. Since that bloodbath, they've lived beneath a magnifying glass. Every cabaret dance, every whispered laugh, every sequin on her dress scrutinized by the press. Their public disgrace reached new lows earlier that year, when on May 25, 1931, they stood trial for fornication and prostitution. Their defense was awkwardly quaint. They were not criminal lovers, just lovers. She was not for sale. He was not a pimp. The trouble was, Jack was still married. His wife Helena had filed for divorce, but the ink wasn't dry. And in a courtroom of moralists, an unmarried woman sharing a bed with a married man is enough to trigger chains and cells. With trial looming and prosecutors sharpening their blades, salvation came on the wings of paperwork. On May 2nd, 1931, the divorce went through. A miracle. The very next day, before the ink on one certificate had even dried, Jack married Louise. Proof of love? Perhaps. But definitely proof of legal strategy. Love had no time to wait, not when facing jail time. And so they sit in Al's cell, guests at a strange, macabre holiday gathering. There are lights and laughter and the illusion of peace, but make no mistake, the world is closing in. On May 3rd, 1931, Jack McGurn and Louise Rolfe stood before a judge in Waukegan, Illinois. 1 hour later, they emerged as man and wife. For Louise, the scene echoed a past escapade. This was the same town where she'd once eloped with Harold Boakes before she was even legally allowed to marry. But those were different times, different men. Jack was her one true love, or so she believed. Love, however, was no defense against the full machinery of American justice. While Jack's legal fate hung in the balance, Christmas Eve 1931 turned sour for Mae Capone. An anonymous telegram had landed on the Bureau of Investigation's desk, accusing Scarface of hosting whiskey-fueled parties in his prison cell, and even entertaining visits from prostitutes arranged by a pimp named Bon Bon. The government launched an investigation. Moneypenny, the ever-cunning prison director, denied everything. No women had visited Capone besides his family, he insisted. Yes, his wife sent meals twice daily, but was that a crime? To the Department of Justice, it was all the proof they needed. Capone was flaunting the law, even from behind bars. Pressure mounted from Washington. The White House had had enough. Capone had to go, not to another wing, but to another prison entirely. A federal facility, one with real locks, real solitude, and no sympathetic wardens. But until the Supreme Court ruled on Capone's appeal, nothing could be done. That ruling came on February 29th, 1932, without so much as a footnote. The appeal was rejected. The sentence stood. 11 years. No more lifelines. Mae's world shattered. There would be no return home, no miracle verdict, just bars and time. She sent Al a telegram that barely held back the flood. "Dear Al, I am so sorry that the case has failed. There is always hope, so endure this ordeal. I will always think of you and pray to have you with us, Sonny and me, very soon. Love and good luck. Your wife." Days later, another darkness crept across America. On March 1st, 1932, Charles Lindbergh's 20-month-old son was stolen from his crib. The man who had once flown across the Atlantic now faced a horror that no wings could outrun. This was not mob vengeance, not a political feud. This was something worse. The Great Depression had birthed a new kind of predator, the kidnapper. To the starving and desperate, the wealthy were no longer idols, they were targets. Al Capone, from his plush cell in Cook County, summoned a journalist. He had a message for the nation. "It's the most outrageous thing I've ever heard in my life," he said, visibly shaken. "How would Mrs. Capone and I feel if our son were kidnapped?" He offered $10,000 for information leading to the baby's safe return. But he didn't stop there. "I can do far more than anyone on earth to find this baby," he boasted. "I had nothing to do with it. I can prove that. But I'm certain a mafia did it. If I'm right, everyone knows I can change the course of things." Then came the real play. He offered to post $250,000 bail and even proposed substituting one of his brothers in prison in his place. In exchange, all he asked for was a presidential pardon. The press erupted. Was America so broken that its salvation rested on the shoulders of its most infamous criminal? Charles Lindbergh reached out to the Treasury. If Capone was genuine, he said, he'd support the proposal. The White House considered it, briefly. But President Hoover was unmoved. There would be no deal. 2 months later, the baby's corpse was found. America grieved and raged. And the face of that rage for many was not the killer. It was the gangster. Capone's reign was over. The man who had once run Chicago like a private empire was now preparing for his transfer to Atlanta, Georgia, to a fortress-like penitentiary where Scarface would be just another number. In Atlanta, the velvet gloves came off. The haircut alone, a mere millimeter's worth, was a humiliation. The tailored suits were swapped for a standard-issue uniform, and the criminal who once dined on lobster now spent 8 hours a day making shoes. After a failed attempt to relive his baseball glory, Al took up tennis. Less American dream, more solitary confinement with a racket. Visits were few. Half an hour, once every 15 days. Foreign languages were forbidden. Teresa Capone, barely speaking English, sat tongue-tied on the visitor's side of a long, cold table, forced to string together scraps of a language she'd never needed. Mae and Sonny, faithful to the last, visited monthly. In return, Al sent telegrams. Birthdays, holidays. He never missed one. For Mother's Day, he composed a poem. The rhyme might not have graced the pages of Keats, but it throbbed with sincerity. "There is a special day for mothers, among all the days of the year, and I want to express my gratitude to someone precious and dear, and wish all the joy and happiness to the sweetest woman, my wife, because you are part of Mother's Day, and the biggest part of my life." He ended it with a flourish of love, a note to Mae. "As time goes on, I realize the debt I owe you. My gratitude keeps growing. My love for you is deeper and stronger. God bless you, and I love you all. Your dear husband, Al Touching," until it surfaced that the same poem, word for word, was also mailed to his mother. The gangster's version of a Hallmark BOGO. Prison transforms men. Al, the playboy overlord, became Alphonse, the wistful husband. Distance breaks the flimsy bonds of vice, but strengthens the steel chains of devotion, and devotion was all he had. He shared his cell with Morris Rusty Rudensky, a Jewish ex-bagel thief turned gangland legend, who once served both Al and his enemies in the North Side Gang. Now locked up and shackled by the state, Morris found freedom through writing and urged Al to pick up the pen. For a man who ran empires, writing a simple letter was torture. "Good God, Rusty, I'm having a hard time writing a letter. The pencil feels like it weighs a ton." He was barely into his 30s, yet he carried himself like a relic. His obsession became the life he'd left behind: Mae, Sonny, home. He begged the prison warden over something deeply important: photographs. Mae had sent 5 of herself. Al was informed he could only keep 1. Outraged, humiliated, he pleaded for permission to destroy the others personally. "I don't want them to end up in a newsroom eager to publish them," he wrote. The once mighty Capone was now a man afraid for his wife's image, desperate to shield her from the gossip pages. The warden relented. Al kept his picture. He gave another to Morris and marveled at Sonny's face. "How the hell can a big guy like me have such a handsome son?" Back outside, Mae lived in siege. She bore the brunt of whispers, the press's curiosity, the weight of a crumbling dynasty. She raised Sonny alone, shielding him from legacy and judgment, and forced herself to believe one thing: Al was still alive. That was her anchor. Because in their world, death didn't knock, it marched. It plowed through the outfit, harvesting widows like wheat. One day at a time, she endured. In a world of shadows and ghosts, she held the line. The bloodletting orchestrated by J. Edgar Hoover's Bureau of Investigation may have choked the arteries of organized crime, but it was not enough to satisfy the Roosevelt administration. The problem wasn't simply locking up gangsters, it was keeping them locked up. The revolving door of prison cells, spun by bribery, communication lines, and sheer audacity, made a mockery of the justice system. What America needed was not another prison. It needed exile. Attorney General Homer S. Cummings proposed one in the summer of 1933. Isolate the most dangerous criminals in a remote place, an island, even Alaska. Within a week, Cummings found his solution, battered by Pacific winds: Alcatraz. A grim rock in the middle of the breathtaking San Francisco Bay, it stood like a final warning carved into stone. The shimmering city lights of San Francisco glinted just across the water, tantalizingly close, yet as unreachable as salvation. August 19th, 1934. A train bearing the weight of American infamy departs from Atlanta. It carries 50 inmates strapped to their seats, convicts who had thumbed their noses at law and punishment. At the center of this human cargo, Al Capone. The entire operation unfolds under a veil of secrecy. The train's route is altered repeatedly, cloaked in misleading signals and false trails to avoid any ambush. No press, no announcements. Just steel, shadows, and silence. At Tiburon, a sleepy coastal town, Capone is offloaded like contraband. He stumbles, not from resistance, but from something far more human: exhaustion. on the boat that ferries him across the waters of his own oblivion. He cannot even stand. The rock rises before him, not as a place, but as a sentence, a monument to lost power. He mutters, protests, even attempts negotiation. But on this stone island, nobody negotiates. A man greets him, James A. Johnston, a stoic figure with white hair and the air of a schoolmaster who has seen too much. At nearly 60, he's been entrusted with taming America's most untamable. He instructs the prisoner to identify himself. Capone's voice cuts through the sea air with worn defiance. "You know who I am." Indeed they do. That's precisely why he's here. "Inmate AZ-85, Johnston replies. Capone is processed like any other man. No favors, no theatrics. Cell 433 becomes his new kingdom, a tomb of iron bars and one light. The radio, his old lifeline to the outside world, is banned. Alcatraz is not a prison, it is silence incarnate. At 6:30 a.m., the inmates are torn from sleep by protocol. The bed is a slab. The world is wet stone and routine. But Capone, stripped of entourage and empire, does not wither. He launders clothes. His hands, once stained with blood and money, now scrub prison uniforms. Perhaps it's the promise of early release. Perhaps it's Mae. She is no longer just a wife. She is a North Star. In this island that time forgot, she is the only point of reference left. His strength, his balance, his reason not to sink. Music tames the brute, or at least it tries. In Alcatraz, it became his refuge. Behind steel bars and institutional silence, Al Capone found solace in his banjo, sent lovingly by Mae. It wasn't just a hobby, it was therapy, a life raft. The sound of plucked strings began to echo down the prison corridors. In time, Al formed a ragtag ensemble, the Rock Islanders, serenading fellow inmates every Sunday. He immersed himself in the only world he could still master, melody. He claimed to Sonny that his repertoire was vast, over 500 songs. "In other words, Junior," he boasted, "there's not a song written that I couldn't play." But Capone was never content simply echoing other men's notes. He composed a ballad of his own, a love song of faith, Madonna Mia. Inspired by conversations with a young Jesuit priest, Vincent Casey, who visited him weekly to speak of the soul and salvation, Al penned the lyrics in secret. A hardened gangster's hymn to the Virgin, soft, pleading, redemptive. "My Madonna, you are the roses that bloom, you are the charm that rests." In the heart of a song, it was a side of Scarface the world had never seen, and it had to remain mostly unseen. Letters were rationed, their contents censored. He could send only one per week to immediate family. Anything too lyrical, too sentimental, too human was purged. So when the long-awaited letters from Mae finally arrived, they felt clipped, impersonal. Al, misreading the signs, fired back, wounded, "If you're too busy to write, don't send telegrams." Solitude breeds introspection, and Al's cell became a chapel of remorse. "I'm 36 years old, and all my life I've tried to be a man," he wrote. "I've made mistakes, we all have, but I hope and pray not to make any more. I owe it to my son, my wife, my mother for the pain I have caused them." To Mae, he made a vow. If she could wait, he would come back to her a different man. March 3rd. To my dear wife, I have received all your wonderful letters. Oh, darling, how I wish I could do everything I want. Then I know, my sweet, that we would be very happy. I'm glad the weather is improving and that you have plenty of sunshine. And sweetheart, go out and play golf every day. I hope you can come for Easter. I would be so happy to see you, doll, and take a look at the magazine called the Reader's Digest February issue. There's a story titled A Woman Over 40. What a jerk! It's good, and shows that you can have plenty of fun for a long time after 40, darling. Don't worry, everything will be fine. I only love you and have completely forgotten about the other one. Love your husband. The tender awkwardness is almost sweet, until that final line. The other one? Who was she? Even locked away, the myth of Capone magnetized admirers. Telegrams from women arrived at the prison in droves. A Moore butler sent wishes for his freedom. A mysterious Muriel assured him, "We are here for you." And then there was Pearl D. Crofton, who went a step further, penning Capone's plea for freedom, a poetic paean to the man behind the myth. The warden intercepted the verses and returned them, along with a warning. Fame is persistent, even when freedom is gone. Al Capone, criminal monarch dethroned, now leafs through the pages of Life Begins at 40, Rudiments of Music, How to Appreciate Music, and the Practical Gardening Guide. A man who once ruled cities now studies flower beds and sonatas, grasping at the tools to become the husband he never was, the father he wishes he could have been. But even redemption has its limits. At Alcatraz, visits are an ordeal. There's no regular day, no guarantee. Just one 45-minute audience a month, if Warden Johnston personally signs off. The island is a fortress, and family affection must pass through a pane of glass, love shouted into perforated steel, every word monitored by guards trained to hear more than they're meant to. Teresa Capone's first visit turns into farce. Accompanied by her daughter Mafalda, the matriarch triggers the prison's security alarm. Her handbag is confiscated, her dignity prodded and searched. Still, the siren screams. The guards call in reinforcements. Eventually, a separate room reveals the culprit. The steel-boned corset Teresa has worn for decades, now declared contraband. Humiliated, furious, she swears in her fractured English that she'll never return to that cursed rock. Once past the gauntlet, they witness something chilling. In the prison yard, lifeless figures lie strewn across the ground. The truth is worse than imagined. These are mannequins, riddled with bullet holes, left out in daylight as a message to inmates. At night, the guards use them for target practice. During the day, they serve as silent warnings. Futile escape ends in death. Mae, for her part, visits rarely. The trek from Miami is long, brutal, and public. It requires crossing a continent, facing a horde of cameras hungry for her pain. She lives now in seclusion, haunted by luxury that no longer comforts. The reporters outside her door are relentless, so she retreats into brief, carefully measured telegrams. "Hello, my dear. I hope you are keeping well. I feel much better. Don't worry about me, you know me. I'll be fine. No one needs to know how much I need you. Sending love and kisses. Mae." Back on the rock, danger simmers. Rumors leak from its wind-whipped walls, dark and violent. Alcatraz was built to house monsters, but no one said the monsters would stay chained. On June 25, 1936, Mae Capone awoke to a headline that nearly stopped her heart cold. Al Capone stabbed. The article, as succinct as it was sinister, offered little comfort. The Department of Justice confirmed that Scarface, the one-time king of Chicago, had been attacked by a fellow inmate inside Alcatraz with a pair of scissors. The tone was clinical, almost dismissive. The injuries appear serious, and worse, the incident suggests Capone is unpopular among his fellow inmates. No mention of whether he would live or die. No word of the aftermath. Just a bloodless line to summarize a man's near execution. Helpless on the opposite coast, Mae could do nothing but imagine the worst. This wasn't the first time she'd feared the sound of her husband's name in a death sentence. Only days earlier, a Sunday misstep in the music room had ended in blood. A fellow inmate accidentally struck Al's head with a saxophone, an offense Al repaid in kind. He smashed the saxophone over the man's skull, collapsing beside the wreckage, his prized $1,500 banjo, Mae's gift, shattered. But the storm was only beginning. On June 23rd, Capone had received a new instrument from Mae, a mandolin, delivered with love and hope, perhaps a chance at normalcy. But as he proudly showed it off in the laundry room, a young Texan named James Lucas, serving 30 years for murder, watched him. Lucas, harboring silent rage and holding stolen scissors from the barber's chair, seized his moment. As Capone turned his back, the Texan lunged and drove the blade into his lower spine. The struggle was short, savage and furious, blood, fists and fury in a bathroom on a rock in the sea. Capone survived, but just barely. The blade pierced near his kidneys, a fragment lodged in his thumb. He was taken to the prison hospital, groaning under the weight of his diminished legend. The department downplayed the attack. The press, as ever, smelled scandal and incompetence. Alcatraz was supposed to be impenetrable, not a coliseum for vendettas. Lucas was thrown into the hole, a cell of total darkness and silence, designed to destroy minds rather than contain bodies. He would crawl out months later, ruined. But that brought Mae no comfort. She refused to sit idle. Hiring a San Francisco lawyer, she petitioned the Attorney General, pleading for Al's transfer on grounds of personal safety. She argued rightly that her husband would be killed on Alcatraz. The response? Silence. Rejection. Official indifference. No transfer. Not even acknowledgement. And the attempts kept coming. An attempted strangulation in the hallway, a tainted breakfast laced with lie. The outfit may have forgotten its old boss, but his enemies hadn't. Power, once tasted, leaves behind enemies who remember. All Mae could do was write, reassure, pretend. A woman abandoned in comfort, her husband trapped in hell. "Well, my dear heart," Al began one letter, stretching hope across the miles of ocean and wire. "Here's your dear husband who loves you with all his heart and soul. Thank you for your lovely letters. I'm so happy to hear you, and our dear love are healthy. I just returned from Mass. Don't worry about me. I am getting better every day." He described the routines of the damned: bi-weekly treatments, exercise in the yard, hot baths, music on weekends. He read magazines. He dreamed. "I've written many songs. Sonny will sing them to you. I'll play them on the piano or mandolin. Yes, darling, I received a beautiful letter from Sonny. He is a son we can be proud of." And then came the dream. "The day I come home, you, he and I will go out to celebrate our happiness. I plan to spend the rest of my life there, at Palm Island. You, me, and Sonny will have lots of happiness in our future." On the rock, it was music and fantasy that kept him alive. For Mae, it was only the letters, and the hope that the next telegram wouldn't start with a headline. The near-fatal stabbing did what even the iron bars of Alcatraz could not. It brought Al and Mae Capone back together. In the aftermath of blood and betrayal, Al seemed suddenly reborn as a man with a single, desperate goal: to be the husband Mae had waited for. The devil of Chicago now fancied himself Dante in exile, and Mae, the quiet wife who had long lived in his shadow, became his Beatrice. Except this wasn't a medieval allegory. It was the brutal, bone-deep reality of organized crime's aftermath, where repentance arrives too late, and love becomes a last will and testament. 5 years had passed since his fall, and on October 24th, 1936, Mae marked the grim anniversary with ink and tears. Saturday, October 24th, 1936. "My dear husband, darling, it has been 5 years today since you were taken away from us. It was a sad, dreadful day, and these 5 long years have been as cruel as they have been terrible. Not just because you were taken away from me and moved from prison to prison, but because everything has become so difficult, burdening you and your loved ones with such a heavy cross to bear. But darling, you have been strong, facing it all with bravery. Despite what you have endured, You have borne it all. I wrote to the warden to ask if I could visit you. I should get his response today, and I will buy my train tickets. Well, my darling, I will stop here. Nothing more to say. Take care of yourself, never give up, grit your teeth and always smile because, you know, darling, it really hurts people to see that they cannot reach us or bring us down. I will see you soon. God bless you. Love and kisses. I love you. Forever, your wife and your son who love you. She signed it as the woman Al once promised heaven to, and who now lived in a kind of earthly purgatory. Mae prepared to travel across the country under a false name, Marie Duval, a nod to the caricaturist who had once shattered gender boundaries in Victorian London. It was fitting. Mae Capone was no ordinary gangster's wife. She was, quietly and without fanfare, becoming something far more formidable. But behind her soothing words and cloak and dagger maneuvers was a secret she couldn't bear to share with Al. While he dreamed in his cell of a quiet return to their Eden on Biscayne Bay, the federal government had trained its sights on her. Once merely the forgotten woman behind the fallen titan, Mae had become the target. The New York Times didn't mince words. The stucco home with its tiled pool and large garden on Biscayne Bay will be sold to repay the tax debt of $51,498, which has recently been ordered against the wife of gangster Al Capone. This was no longer just punishment, it was total war. Her sanctuary, the very place Al clung to like a child to a dream, was about to be seized. The government's logic was merciless. Al had shielded his assets by signing everything over to his wife. Now she would pay for his sins, legally, financially, and possibly criminally. In a twist of irony thick enough to choke on, Mae had become the de facto treasurer of the outfit, the reluctant general of a collapsing empire. Newspapers dubbed her the female generalissimo. She was not a leader by choice, but by necessity, because no one else remained standing. Al never intended this. His empire was built to shield Mae and Sonny from harm, but his fortress of gold had become a trap. Mae faced ruin not just of comfort, but of liberty. Prison, once a nightmare for her husband, now loomed for her. And Sonny, the boy she raised with trembling pride, could lose both parents to the ghost of bootleg fortunes. She still wrote to Al with calm, steady hands, but the cracks were spreading beneath the surface. And as the world conspired to erase every trace of the Capone name from its ledgers, Mae fought, not with guns or bribes, but with love, silence, and a woman's impossible endurance. He knew nothing of the looming ruin because she knew him too well. One violent outburst, one fit of rage behind those walls, and the man who once ran Chicago could lose even what little dignity he had left. She filed a motion with the federal court to halt the forced sale of their sanctuary on Palm Island. It was denied. The legal reasoning was as cruel as it was clean. Al had placed all his wealth in Mae's name, making her legally responsible, and therefore solely guilty. The trap had snapped shut. Surrounded by lawyers, drowning in court costs, her capital vanished. Only Ralph's 11th-hour delivery of cold, hard cash salvaged their home. It was a breath, not a rescue. And yet, she clung to the only thing that remained intact: love. My dear husband, it is now 3:30 p.m. Our son stayed at school to play handball. We have nothing to be ashamed of, and we are proud of our papa. So I want our son to move forward in this world, face what comes, and I want everyone to know who he is and accept him for who he is. There will be many obstacles he will have to face in his life, and I am sure he will face them and come out stronger. Oh, my darling, I could keep writing endlessly about what I have on my mind, but I know you understand how I feel. What I want for him is to be a man respected by all, because he deserves the same chance as everyone else in this world. So I never discourage him in what he wants to do. Instead, I try to encourage him. No one has cared about his success or well-being until now, and I do not expect that to change. We will manage. Well, my sweet, I hope you are well. After all, there are only two people on earth that I care about and live for, my husband and my son. God bless you. Then, just as Mae allowed herself a breath, the world collapsed again. On February 9th, 1938, nestled in her Miami refuge, she read a headline that turned her stomach. Al Capone stabbed. There were whispers of insanity, isolation, and humiliation. No details, just fear. The truth behind the headline was no less alarming. 5 days earlier, Al had dared to wear his blue uniform on a Saturday instead of the mandatory grey. It was a harmless rebellion, something small to make him feel human. A guard confronted him, and Al, already fading from syphilitic dementia, spiraled. He went to the wrong cell, collapsed, vomited, hurled insults in Italian, and brawled with guards. By the end of the morning, he was in the infirmary, confused, sick, and strapped down like a mad dog. Mae had only the newspaper's brutal ambiguity to guide her. The woman who had once only wanted quiet now rose like a general in silk gloves. She wrote directly to Alcatraz's warden, James A. Johnston, pleading for clarity and the right to stand by her husband. February 9th, 1938. Dear Sir, given the rumors, I would like to leave right now. This way, I could be near my husband if something happens and he needs me. But I wouldn't want to make this trip only to find out that he has already been transferred. Please reply to me. Respectfully, Mrs. Alphonse Capone. She didn't know what was happening, but she knew one thing. Al would not have sabotaged his chance at early release. Not after all he'd written. Not with Sonny's 20th birthday approaching. He had promised her this nightmare was almost over. She had carried him through the years with letters, through the shame with silence, and through exile with love. Now, as the federal government sharpened its knives and journalists sniffed like vultures, she would carry him again. Even if the whole world fell away, Mae Capone would not. On February 11th, 1938, Al Capone, once the unshakable king of Chicago, wrote his wife with the unsteady hope of a dying man trying to sound like his former self. He thanks her, capitalized with reverence, for his recovery, referring to God as a woman. Please, don't worry about me, he insists. Keep that beautiful smile on your lips. He promises obedience, vows to come home, to love her alone, forever. But Mae, reading between the lines, hears not the reassurance of her husband, but the disjointed ramblings of a man slipping further from reason. Mae's visit isn't scheduled until February 28th. She pleads with Warden Johnston, but the prison's rules are ironclad. As she waits, frantic and helpless, the truth surfaces. Al is deteriorating. The guards see the confusion, the mood swings, the hallucinations. A psychiatrist is summoned. A lumbar puncture confirms what some had suspected, but many refused to believe. Syphilis, untreated and now ravaging his brain. The disease, quietly dormant for years, had resumed its cruel work, eroding Al's nervous system, hijacking his thoughts. His decline is humiliating. The great crime boss begins babbling about solving immigration and building factories, as though launching a second empire from a cot in Alcatraz's infirmary. He suggests hospitals to his doctors, preaches segregation for criminals like himself. Grandiose delusions take the place of coherent thought, and yet one idea remains painfully clear. Mae and Sonny. They are all he clings to. Mae reads the newspapers and sees her private pain splashed across front pages. On February 15th, 1938, headlines scream, "Mrs. Capone heads west due to Al's illness." Reporters tail her across the country like bloodhounds. No change of train or alias can shake them. On March 1st, just after her second visit in 2 days, an unprecedented break of protocol, her cab is chased by a motorcade of press vehicles from San Francisco to San Jose. Cornered at a gas station, she holds her ground. "No," she tells the cameras. "Al hasn't lost his mind. He's fine. He'll be eligible for early release next year." A forced smile, rolled up windows, and silence. Behind the gates of Alcatraz, doctors prod and diagnose. They want proof. Is Al faking? The answer comes coldly and clinically. Psychosis with general paralysis of the insane. Syphilis has eaten into his mind. Mae calls the warden again and again, begging for his release, swearing she can care for him, find him proper treatment. But Warden Johnston stands firm. Al Capone, AZ-850, is no longer a mob king, nor a sick husband. He is a prisoner, and he will remain one. Mae's pleas fall into the same silence that surrounds the rock. On March 14, 1938, Warden Johnston offered Mae a brittle reassurance about her husband's condition, stating he seemed responsive to treatment that, unbeknownst to most, involved infecting Al Capone with malaria in a desperate, experimental bid to scorch syphilis from his nervous system with searing fever, followed by aggressive quinine doses to combat the malaria itself. Al, ever the gambler, signed off on this biological Russian roulette, his last chance at a future beyond the bars of Alcatraz. A release date was finally set for January 6, 1939, but before the first treatment, Mae visited on August 3rd, bringing their now nearly grown son, Sonny, who hadn't seen his father since he ruled Chicago. When Al saw the polished young man through the glass, he mistook him for a reflection of his former self. "My son," he murmured, pressing close to the glass he once hoped his child would never see him behind. In September, the malaria therapy began and nearly killed him. Convulsions, delirium, and incontinence ravaged the man who had once commanded armies of vice. Another Christmas passed in agony and silence. But on November 1939, the shattered Scarface, jaundiced and barely coherent, was transferred under heavy guard to Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, where Mae, dressed as though for a wedding, met him with a radiant smile, unaware of or unmoved by the warden's warnings that he remained a ward of the state. Capone, now Mr. Martini, was moved to a private room at Gettysburg Hospital under the care of Dr. Joseph E. Moore, a leading psychiatrist and syphilis specialist, whose first concern was not Capone's mind, but whether the family could afford the bills. Mae, unshakable, found the money. For weeks, she, Teresa, and Ralph Capone slipped in and out of the hospital, avoiding the journalists hounding them for a glimpse of the fallen emperor. Al, fragile and childlike, would light up only when Mae appeared, the only constant in his turbulent world. And the doctors, despite their accolades and advanced treatments, could not promise more than a semblance of stability. Brief moments of lucidity punctuated by confusion, aggression, and despair. It was only after 3 weeks of intensive treatment that Dr. Moore declared him stable enough to return to a semblance of normal life. They moved him to a small apartment in Mount Washington, a Baltimore suburb, under a new alias, Rossi. Yet, for all intents and purposes, Al remained confined to a hospital without walls. He sat among a pile of pillows in his new home, staring vacantly, shifting from side to side, an adult in body, but with the mind of a child. Mae clung to hope, desperate to believe the worst was behind them. Dr. Moore, however, remained pragmatic, documenting Al's progress in sterile terms. The patient now has the mental faculties of a 14-year-old, compared to a 7-year-old previously. Mae asked if another specialist might be able to help. Moore suggested she instead prepare for a slow, inevitable decline. In March 1940, the Capones made the journey back to their estate in Miami. Al left behind the cherry tree he had donated to the hospital, a gesture of thanks for the temporary reprieve from his suffering. His physical body was free, but the man had changed. As the warm Miami air greeted him, he did not exclaim with joy or relish in his homecoming. He wandered the familiar grounds, now unfamiliar to him. He turned the gas on and off without reason, left doors open, and forgot who was in the room with him. His once pristine suits were replaced by pajamas. The once feared mobster, the face of American crime, sat in a small bungalow near the lawn, guarding against imaginary threats. Mae, still beautiful and resilient, dedicated herself to keeping up appearances, their life a theater of normalcy. They dined at Miami's finest restaurants. But Al, caught in a whirlpool of shifting realities, drifted in and out of conversation. At times, he'd speak with clarity, recounting tales of their youth. Then, as quickly, he'd become agitated by the sound of tires squealing outside, convinced hitmen lurked behind every corner. Leaving a restaurant, which once caused a stir of excitement, became a torment as he crouched low, shaking, heart racing as if he were being hunted. Mae bore the brunt of his paranoia, shepherding him to their car, calming him with reassurances she no longer believed. Inside the confines of their Palm Island home, Al sought solace in fishing off the dock and playing cards, gin rummy, balota. But even these pleasures were fleeting. He rarely slept in the master bedroom, opting instead for a small bungalow where he could peer out the window and monitor any cars passing by. Mae found hidden stashes of chocolate bars throughout the room, evidence of his ever-present anxiety and guilt. Despite the IRS's dogged attempts, Al remained broke on paper. His assets, like ghosts, seemed to vanish whenever the government tried to pin them down. The family's wealth, once immeasurable, had dwindled, and Mae fought to hold on to what little remained. She prayed for strength and found solace in routine. She became a mother figure to Al's niece, teaching her to write neatly, to sip tea properly, to set a beautiful table, anything to maintain a semblance of dignity amidst the chaos. Christmas came, and the Capone family reunited. Even the war with its looming threat could not overshadow the joy of having Al home, albeit a broken version of himself. They strung up war bonds like tinsel on the tree, symbols of patriotism in a time of turmoil. For one brief, shining moment, the Capone home was filled with laughter, music, and the warmth of a family that had been too long divided. But the happiness was as fragile as the glass ornaments adorning the tree. Al's desire to return to Chicago, the city that made him and destroyed him, nagged at him. Mae knew the temptation. It was more than just a city. It was his kingdom, his identity. She remembered the prison warden's warning. Al must never reconnect with his old associates. Yet in 1942, the call was too strong to resist. They returned to 7244 South Prairie Avenue, and Chicago welcomed them like a prodigal son come home. Al had abandoned his pajamas for a crisp white shirt, cufflinks sparkling like diamonds in the sun, and a tie held by a pin shaped like a woman's face. The family gathered in their home, a sense of celebration in the air. They headed to church as a clan, then returned for a feast of cold meats, cheeses, and wine, a banquet for the king who had fallen but returned nonetheless. Even in this idyllic setting, the signs of Al's illness were never far. He sat in a large chair, his niece on his lap, patting her small hands and beaming at her innocent questions. When she touched the faded scar on his cheek and asked, "Did you get hurt?" A hush fell over the room. But Al only laughed, the deep, hearty laugh of a man who'd forgotten why he'd been angry in the first place. The laughter echoed through the house, a bittersweet reminder of what once was and what would never be again. The visit ended as quickly as it began. Back in Miami, Mae resumed the daily routine of being both wife and nurse, guardian and mourner. The bright future Al had once promised never came. Instead, time passed in a blur of treatments, good days and bad, until even the bad days seemed good in comparison. The final years at Palm Island were marked by a semblance of peace, but not contentment. Mae had everything and yet nothing, her days spent watching over a man she'd once feared losing, but who was now already gone. Al's health deteriorated, his mind slipping further away until the proud gangster became just a man who needed help to tie his shoes and recall his own name. The world had moved on. Scarface was no longer the terror of the streets, but a forgotten relic, a story for old-timers to tell their grandkids. Mae Capone arranges the last few touches for Al's 48th birthday party with meticulous care. 28 years of marriage, over a decade of turmoil, and yet here they are, still standing. Despite everything, she remains the dignified wife of Scarface, able to face the whispers and sidelong glances. Al's condition has improved since he was among the first to receive penicillin treatment, discovered just a few years ago. The doctor said it wouldn't cure him, but at least it put the brakes on the disease that had ravaged him. Tonight, she's hopeful. She's even invited a few prominent Miami figures to show them that Al, despite his dark past, is now just another neighbor. A man tamed by love and time. 3 days later, on January 21st, that fragile peace shatters. At 4 a.m., Mae jolts awake to the sound of Al's heavy, labored breathing, a death rattle that fills the room with dread. She switches on the light and shakes him gently. He convulses, unresponsive. Panic surges through her veins. Is this another stroke? Her fear is overwhelming. She fumbles for the phone, desperately dialing the doctor. He arrives swiftly, but there's little he can do. Al's body is half paralyzed, his heart barely beating, lungs struggling for every breath. Family members, Teresa, Ralph, everyone, gather around, each taking turns to sit by his side. The tension in the house is palpable, a ticking clock they all feel winding down to its inevitable end. 4 days later, on January 25th, the stroke claims Al's life. The man whose empire once brought in $25 million a year, who shrugged off the relentless pursuit of federal agents, and who was responsible for an era of bloodshed and corruption, finally succumbs, not to bullets or bars, but to the quiet betrayal of his own failing body. At exactly 7:35 p.m., Mae stands by, frozen, as Al's eyes go blank and his chest stills. The man who had withstood the fury of rival gangsters and the relentless pursuit of the federal government had finally been conquered by something no one could outgun or outmaneuver: time. The tears that trace her cheeks are not only of grief, but also of relief. She kneels beside him, grasping his arm. "I'm here, Al," she whispers. "You can rest now." The silence that follows swallows her whole. For a moment, she feels the earth shift beneath her. The room spins, and she collapses. When she comes to, Mae finds herself alone. The black limousine is ready to push through the throng of journalists and onlookers swarming the property, hoping for a last glimpse of the once mighty kingpin now reduced to a lifeless body. Oh, time. Suspend your flight, and you, propitious hours, do not carry my beloved's body to Philbrick's funeral home, she longs to cry out, knowing that no one would listen, that time will not heed her wish. Al, 1.79 meters tall, now seems tiny in that bronze coffin, dressed in his navy blue double-breasted jacket, black tie, white shirt, and matching shoes. More than 350 people pass by to see him, out of curiosity, homage, or defiance, before the body is taken by car to Chicago, the city that witnessed his rise and fall. The man whose crime syndicate ruled the underworld, who had gained and lost millions in gambling and bets, who was attributed with dozens of murders, and who corrupted so many politicians, goes underground on a freezing afternoon in near total indifference. The era of grand gangster funerals is over. For all his notoriety, there are no processions of black cars trailing behind his hearse, no throngs of mourners lining the streets. Al Capone, public enemy number one, is buried like a family uncle who simply passed away in his sleep. On February 4th, 1947, at Mount Olivet Cemetery, Mae's steps barely leave marks in the snow-covered ground. There are plenty of flowers sent from all over the country, but no bombastic displays of reverence. The modesty suits Mae, who, despite being cast as Lady Scarface, always preferred the quiet, private life. She gazes at the humble gravestone, reading the small inscription in Italian, Here lies Alphonse Capone, born January 17, 1899, died January 25, 1947. The reporters report, the priest prays, the gravediggers dig. Mae stands unmoved, detached, as if extracting herself from the futility of it all. She seems sad but also relieved that her torment is over. It had been so difficult for her to see her husband brought so low, diminished, scorned by his former loyalists, politically reduced to a pariah. The darkness overtakes the sky, and the cold numbs her legs. She slips into the limousine, leaving her exuberant Italian there under marble with cold veins in a bronze coffin lined with a layer of gardenias. Everyone assumes she'll be buried beside him someday, but Mae has already decided otherwise. For all the talk of loyalty and love, of vows unbroken and devotion steadfast, Mae makes a surprising decision, one that no one saw coming. She will not share her final resting place with him. Whether it's a small, final act of rebellion against a life dominated by his shadow, or a way to find a semblance of freedom, she'll never say. All anyone knows is that she chooses not to lie beside the man she stayed beside for nearly 3 decades. In a letter to Mafalda, she writes, "My mother asked me to convey her wishes regarding her burial and mine. Please be advised that we will not use the designated graves, and you may use them at your discretion. My mother and I prefer to be buried here in Florida." Eternity will pass without him. Al and Mae will not end together on a bed of gardenias. After Al's death, Mae and Sonny attempt to distance themselves from the tumultuous past and build a quieter, simpler life in Miami Beach. With a modest vision of reclaiming some semblance of normalcy, they open an Italian restaurant at 6970 Collins Avenue, aptly named The Grotto. There, Mae pours her energy into every dish, recreating the familiar tastes of the Capone family kitchen: rich red sauces simmered with spices, hearty meatballs and bowls of steaming pasta that invoke a sense of tradition and comfort. It's a far cry from the world of speakeasies, bootlegging and backroom deals, but it's an attempt to reshape their story, one meal at a time. Mae's presence in the grotto becomes a quiet yet resilient one. In the dimly lit corner of the restaurant, with its checkered tablecloths and wrought iron chairs, she sits, keeping a watchful eye on Sonny as he bustles between tables. The regulars, aware of her history but too polite, or perhaps too fearful to mention it, treat her with a distant respect. They know she's more than just a restaurant owner. She's the widow of the most infamous mobster in American history. Yet, in the grotto, she is simply Mrs. Capone, the elderly woman with the sad eyes who never lost her quiet dignity, even in the face of a world that once trembled at her husband's name. The restaurant becomes a modest success, a neighborhood spot where locals and curious tourists stop by, some hoping to catch a glimpse of the notorious widow. For Mae, it's a way to stay connected to the outside world while maintaining the barrier of anonymity she so desperately craves. Despite the whispers and occasional glances, the people of Miami Beach come to respect the Capone family's wish for privacy. Over the years, as new generations arrive and the notoriety of Capone's empire fades, Mae becomes less of a public figure and more of a quiet legend, a woman who managed to outlive the bloodshed and brutality that defined her earlier life. Mae's time at the grotto gives her a sense of purpose, but it can't completely erase the weight of her past. Each evening, as the last of the customers leave and the chairs are placed atop the tables, she's left alone with her thoughts. The photographs of Al that once adorned their Miami mansion are gone now, boxed up and stored away in an effort to move forward. Yet, the memories linger like ghosts. She remembers the man who ruled Chicago, who commanded respect and fear in equal measure, and who, in his final years, became a broken shell of himself, haunted by his own past and ravaged by disease. And then there's Sonny, who carries the burden of the Capone name, forever marked, forever trying to escape the long shadow cast by his father. Even as Mae continues her role as the family matriarch, there's an unspoken understanding that the Capone legacy has crumbled. The once mighty empire, reduced to ashes, left them with little more than a tarnished reputation and fading memories of wealth and power. The crime syndicates that Al once helmed have moved on, evolving and reshaping under new leadership, leaving the Capones as relics of a bygone era. With Al's passing, Mae becomes a living reminder of a story everyone wants to forget, but no one can completely erase. Mae spends her remaining years in relative anonymity, keeping a low profile. She devotes herself to her faith, attends mass regularly, and supports local charities, trying to distance herself from the sin and scandal that characterized her younger days. Yet, there's a palpable sense of loss in her quiet moments, a longing for something that perhaps she never fully had: a normal life. Despite Al's countless transgressions and betrayals, Mae remains fiercely loyal to his memory, refusing to speak ill of him or of the choices that brought them to where they are now. Her silence is her armor, a way of protecting herself and her son from a world that never really accepted them. When Mae's health begins to decline in the mid-1980s, she retreats further into solitude, finding solace in the company of close family members and a few trusted friends. By then, the Capone name is mostly a distant memory, overshadowed by new scandals, new crimes, and new figures that capture the public's imagination. The journalists who once camped outside her door have long since moved on, and the public, preoccupied with fresh stories of corruption and vice, forgets about the quiet old woman living out her final days in Florida. Mae dies on April 16, 1986, at the age of 89 in a small nursing home in Miami. The news of her passing is noted in the obituaries, a small footnote that evokes little more than a murmur of recognition. After all, what remained to be said about Lady Scarface? She had outlived her husband by almost 40 years, enduring in a way few could have imagined. In the end, Mae Capone, the woman who had once stood beside the most feared man in America, slips away quietly, her death barely making a ripple in the vast ocean of public consciousness. Her final chapter is written far from the mob wars and the violence that shaped her life. No lavish funerals, no parade of mourners paying their respects. Just a simple service attended by a few family members who remember Mae as more than Al Capone's wife. They remember her as the woman who endured with grace, who held her head high through scandals, prisons, and betrayals. The woman who chose to love the man, not the myth, and who, despite everything, never abandoned the promises she made so many decades before. Mae's passing marks the true end of the Capone era. For years, she had been its last living link, the keeper of secrets she would never reveal. And now, with her gone, the story is over. The Capone name fades into history, taking with it the power, the fear, and the myth. What remains is Mae's quiet legacy, a legacy of strength and silent endurance that tells a different story, one of a woman who stood by her family until the very end,